Hello everybody, this is Zaxter99, and I'm proud to go ahead and present you guys with my first collection of Chillers videos. This is my take, my way of giving you guys ASMR, easy to sleep to horror stories, easy to be entertained by if you want to stay up and you want to listen to every word, by all means, listen to every video. I think I have some really good stories here, all from the Reddit No Sleep community. Some of these writers are exceptionally creative, and I know I've enjoyed these stories before I read them. I reached out to every one of them, got their permission to read them to you, and now I've got my first collection in a video. And if you are using these videos to sleep here on YouTube, make sure you loop the video. Go to your settings. So I think it's under other settings. So you have to go to the, like on your phone, you go up to the gear icon in the upper right, and then you go to your settings, go to other settings, and then you can loop your video if you want to use my voice to sleep to. So be sure and comment down below, guys, before you start listening or at some time while you're listening. Be sure you let me know who you are, where you're from, and what time of day you're listening to these videos. And I would love to see those comments down below. Make sure if you're not already subscribed to my channel here, make sure you subscribe so that you're getting notifications of every time I upload a new Chillers video or some other video that you might enjoy. Thanks for watching and enjoy the content. It's you. The frigid evening air bites at my skin as I throw my car door closed. I feel like I'm lost as I step out into the driveway. The manor looms against the orange sky, casting a faintest shadow over me. I don't let it scare me away. I can't let it. Its windows glow a hazy yellow and look down on me like watchful eyes. There is an unignorable feeling building in my gut. I do not belong here. I can scarcely believe the manor itself belongs here. It looks as though it has been ripped from the past, from a time of lords and balls and cotillion. Something I can only hope to experience through my television screen in one of those soapy period dramas. Its walls seem to stretch impossibly high, and its steep roof meets at multiple jagged peaks. The structure is ordered chaos with multiple bays protruding at odd angles, but there is an audacious beauty to the disorder of the manor. My heels clack against the pavement as I step up to the double-wide front doors, as if they sense my presence. They pull open with a low, croaking sound. I have the unshakable feeling that this is my last chance to turn and run away. But what good would that do? It doesn't matter if danger lurks inside the manor. If I try to flee, there may be nothing left to return to, only ashes of what I've strained to hold together for the past 2 years. That was the warning, wasn't it? That's what's at stake. A figure steps out of the door. Against the backlight of the manor's interior, I can't make out a face, but as I strain my eyes and step closer, I realize it's a wasted effort. The figure in the doorway is wearing a mask that in and of itself is featureless, a rounded black plate over the face. He, well, I believe it's a man, beckons me to follow him inside with a wave of his arms. I swallow my unease and follow after my faceless greeter. He leads me down a wide hallway. The interior of the manor gives the impression that nobody lives here. There are no furnishings, and the walls are underdecorated. Blank slates save for the scones that light our way. I wipe the sweat from my palms against my dress. fearing what kind of trap that I've just wandered into. And without a word, my guide shows me to a door at the end of the hall, and he steps aside. He wants me to go inside. I try to peek around the edges of his mask as I approach the door, trying to just catch a glimpse of what kind of expression he might be making under there. But the edges press neatly against the skin and leave me nothing to see. I can't help but wonder if there's even a face at all to be seen beneath that mask. My hand grips the brass doorknob and twists, the door coming open with a click. I step through into a grand dining hall. It is in stark contrast to the rest of the house, with furnishing covering every inch of the space. A large rectangular table stretches across the center of the room, with a crystal chandelier hanging above the center. A towering hutch is sprawled across one wall, displaying a neat arrangement of fine porcelain. And though flames crackle in the fireplace at the far corner of the room, the dining hall still feels very cold. There are 4 seats around the table, one on each side. 2 of them are already filled. At the far head of the table is a kid that can't be any older than 19. He's pale, with dark circles under his eyes that dart back and forth across the room nervously. His lips are pressed tightly together, and I can see his jaw clenching. I can't blame him for being anxious. There's been a whirlpool in my stomach from the very moment I got the letter in the mail. Sitting to the left of the kid is a tall, thin man dressed in a suit that doesn't quite fit. It juxtaposes the kid's baggy hoodie, and I assume this man must have felt the same impulse to dress for this odd occasion that I had. The thin man has a narrow but kind face. Boxy glasses rest on top of his crooked nose. His hair rings around the sides of his head, and the bald skin on top shimmers beneath the chandelier. They both acknowledge me with a glance as I step into the room. I nod my head curtly in return and cross the table, running my hand along the lace tablecloth as I find my seat. It isn't marked with a name card. That would be against the rules. Instead, a pack of Marlboros rests on top of a plate, and I blush, knowing they're meant for me. I set my purse down on the table beside me and take my seat across from the thin man with the kid to my right. We wait in silence for the last empty seat at the end of the table to be filled. It's several agonizing moments before another man barges through the door into the dining hall. He's dressed casually with suspenders that frame his bulging gut. His shoulders are broad, arms thick, and hairy below his rolled-up sleeves. He eyes each one of us in the room with fire before taking a seat. He scoffs at the item on his plate. I'd seen it myself as I walked by earlier, but I'm sure the other 2 in the room had as well. A golden badge with red accents from the chief of the Northgate Fire Department. It was my first clue as to the identity of one of the other people in this room, and a vital one. None of us seem to know what to do as we sit around the table. I look around at my mysterious companions. One of them knows my secret, the ugliest part of me that has threatened to tear me apart from the inside for 2 years now. Tonight, that threat may come to fruition. My eyes are on the chief. Why would he be here? Is he the one? Or is it just to make me scared? It's the chief who finally dares to break the silence. I take it that we all got a letter. All but one, I think. That's the thin man. His voice is mousy, like he had to force the air out of his own lungs. 3 days ago, I got a letter in the mail as well. There was no return address, no indication of who or where it came from. Inside was a single slip of paper that read, "I know what you did. I'm going to tell the world unless you play my game." Below, there was an address for the manor, a date, and a time for the dinner party. On the back, a set of instructions. How to play. Abide by the rules and guess which dinner party attendee knows your secret. Guess correctly and you win. Your secret will be safe. If you guess incorrectly, you'll be punished. But those will be the worst. You only get one guess, so make it count. The rules are, you may not tell anyone at the table your name. You may not leave the table until someone has been accused. An accusation must be made by the end of the dinner party, and the accusation must be unanimous. I don't even know what I'm doing here, the chief barks. I haven't done a thing. There's something in his voice. It's defensive. He's lying. He has done something, and he's testing the room, seeing if anyone will challenge him. My heart slows down just a bit. The chief may be just another player in this game after all, or he's doing a very good job of acting that part. Either way, his presence here wipes away any lingering doubts that this whole thing is some kind of a hoax. Someone in this room definitely knows what I did, and they planted the chief here to make me understand that. How do we start, I ask, but two of the other three people in the room won't know how to answer, and the third would never say. As expected, the others all stay silent. The door is thrown open a moment later, causing a thin man to jump. Two masked servants enter the room, each carrying a stainless steel platter in one arm. A bowl of steaming hot soup is placed in front of each of us. The broth smells richly of beef. I feel my throat tighten. The servants vanish back out the door, and silence looms again. I bite down on my lip as I watch the room. The thin man takes up a spoon and dips it into his soup. Before he can fit it into his mouth, the chief shoots up from his chair. "It's you," he declares. The thin man gapes and drops the spoon. It clatters against the bowl and sends a splash of broth that freckles the white lace tablecloth. The chief must have had the same thought as I did. Someone in this room brought us all here just to punish us. They pitted us against each other, and we don't know how far they're willing to take things. They don't want us to trust anything, including this food. The first person to take a bite would be taking a risk, unless they absolutely knew it was safe. "What did I do?" the thin man asks. "That soup's poison for all we know," says the chief. "But you dove right in." I didn't think," the thin man stammers. "Calm down," I say to the chief. "We only get one guess, remember? We need to be sure." The chief grunts and sits back down. None of us touch our soup, the thin man delicately pushing it away from himself now. There's an angle to this game. For now, I have to assume anyone at the table has a secret like mine. Uncovering those secrets is the key to winning this game. But if the others are anything like myself, they won't be willing to reveal their own secrets. If the orchestrator of this game put the chief here to deter me from sharing mine, he's likely took similar measures with the others. I need to get them talking, to make them slip up, and make them reveal too much. "What was on your plate when you came in?" I asked the thin man. "Just these glasses," he says, pushing them up his nose. "Jesus, and you put them on?" the chief balks. I wonder at the meaning behind the glasses. The pack of cigarettes left on my plate seemed meant to taunt me. Was it the same for the others? "And you?" I asked the kid. He holds up a cell phone, a screen shattered into a glass web. The thin man's eyes flick toward the kid, then back away. Almost like he's afraid to even look at him. Is there a connection there? "I had this pack of cigarettes on mine," I say. "So what am I supposed to call you then?" the chief complains. "Smokey? I don't understand why we can't just say our names." "Because that would be too easy," the thin man says. It begs the question why the orchestrator barred us from sharing our own names. What would our names reveal to one another? Too easy to do what? The chief questions. No win, I suppose, says the thin man. What's stopping me from telling everyone here my name right now, says the chief. It's against the rules. Well, who cares about the rules? Then do it, I test him. Tell us your name. The chief's eyes fix on mine. He's thinking exactly what I'm thinking. None of us know for sure what will happen if we break a rule. At the very least, we lose the game. Our secrets would be revealed. But there's that line in the letter. Yes, incorrectly and be punished. But whose will be the worst? Whose will be the worst? There's an undeniably sinister note to the line, as if the punishment for failure is far worse than simply having our secrets revealed. There's something else in store for the losers of this game. But what? Breaking a rule would be risking to finding out, and it's clear that none of us are willing to tread that ground. What's going to happen? The chief chuckles, but there's a nervous undertone to it. No offense, but I'm pretty sure if it came down to it, I could take all of you on. He's probably right. I don't stand a chance in a fight against this chief. And it's hard to picture the thin man or the kid getting the upper hand on him as well. But whoever orchestrated this game was confident. They wouldn't have invited a man like the chief without a plan to keep him in line. He knows that too. He eyes us like sharks circling the water, and he doesn't dare give us a drop of his blood. Forget it, he grumbles. He stands up from his seat and crosses to a beverage cart in the corner of the room, taking a bottle of bourbon and popping the cap off. He gulps it straight down from the bottle and lets out a satisfied "ah" when he's done. Hang on, the thin man protests. How do we know it's not you now? If the food could be poisoned, so could that drink. Then so be it, says the chief before taking another swig. But I'm not getting through tonight without a drink. He plops back down in his seat, and I make a mental note about the way he's coddling that bottle. I look to my right and notice the kid staring at him too, his eyes wide, almost fearful. Are you okay? I ask. The kid blinks like I pulled him out of a trance. He looks at me and nods almost imperceptibly. No exit, the thin man whispers. What was that? I ask. No exit, he repeats, louder this time. John Paul Sartre. It's a play about three people locked in a room together, except the room is in hell. Hell is other people. Sounds awfully familiar, the chief chimes in. Do you think whoever brought us here was trying to replicate that play? I asked the thin man. It must be him then, says the chief. I've never heard of that stupid play. He's the only one going on about it. Just because I'm more well-read than this oaf does not mean I set this all up, the thin man retaliates. What did you call me? And the kid stifles laughter at this. It's the first time I've seen him look something other than petrified. Something funny, the chief growls, and the kid retreats further into his chair, shaking his head. In the play, the thin man continues, the characters confess their crimes to one another. Maybe we're supposed to do the same. Well, you first, the chief scoffs. The thin man's mouth falls open, but he can't summon any words. He drops his chin, ashamed of himself. That's what I thought, says the chief. He takes another long swig of bourbon. He's gone through about a third of the bottle already. Anybody else want to give it a go? Though it's not against the rules, no one wants to be the first to show their hand or share their secret. The room falls back into silence, and as if on cue, the masked servants come through the door once again with fresh platters. to take away our untouched appetizers and place unique plates down in front of each of us. When they lift the lid off my plate, I see a blackened mass of food. It's all been burned to a crisp. Another taunt. Two pungent smells wave toward me from either side, competing for dominance. From my left, the chief's food smells as though it's been soaked through in liquor, and from my right, the kid's food smells raw and rotten. I choke down a gag. We all eye the thin man. His plate is empty. "What's that about?" the chief questions. "I don't know," the thin man insists. "We all get this fucked up food and you get nothing? That's suspicious if you ask me. Will you stop accusing me over every little thing?" Hearing these two at each other's throat makes my mouth water for a cigarette. I find my hand subconsciously reaching for the pack of Marlboros before I pull it away. Another look at my charred plate wipes the craving from my mind. Both the place markers and the meals had been meant to remind us that someone in the room knows our secrets, but that also means that I can use them to my advantage, to use them as clues. A fire chief with a penchant for drink, a broken cell phone and rotten meat, a pair of glasses and an empty plate. The thin man's clues are so nondescript it's harder to gather any meaning from them at all. My suspicion shifts towards him, but I'm not ready to make any final accusations yet. I ponder over the other clues as well. The chief has already given a clear enough image of himself, even without the second clue. There's nothing new to gain there, so now I focus on the kid. I try to piece together the meaning behind his two clues, but I can't think of a connection. The rotten meat on his plate makes me think that whatever secret he's keeping is a gruesome one. It would explain the fear written in bold across his face. He may have the most to lose tonight. I feel sorry for him, but I'm also afraid of him. The chief looks down at my plate, notes the pack, untouched, of cigarettes beside it. "Feeling like you need a puff yet?" My heart pangs, fearing he's figured me out. "Keep that habit up and your lungs will be looking like that plate of yours." Oh boy. The irony as he takes another swig from his bottle. "I already quit," I say. 2 years ago, in fact. There's something judgmental in the chief's tone that makes me explode. "Do you have a problem?" "Let's just say I'm not all that impressed with my current company." Some of his words are beginning to slur together. "Because you're a class act," I argue. The chief slams the fist down on the table, sending a shock wave across it as it rattles all of our plates. "I save lives for a living. I'm a goddamn hero. What the hell do you do?" A laugh escapes from my chest. "Hero? You wouldn't be here if that was the case." "You think you know something?" he accuses. "I think I can put this together," I say. "You're barking up the wrong tree." The chief's face is red, and not just because of the alcohol. He takes another drink, and it spills down his chin. He's disgusting. "You're so quick to make accusations," says the thin man. "How do we know it's not you?" "I'm the only one making the effort to figure this thing out." "You really think that's true?" I ask him. "It's a good cover," the thin man theorizes. "You're taking the attention off yourself and putting it on everyone else." "Am I not the center of attention right now?" "You're so full of yourself," I groan. "Watch it," the chief warns. "Only someone so full of himself would create a game like this," the thin man mutters. "Or someone so insecure," the chief presses back. We're getting nowhere with this bickering. The clock is ticking down. Through two large windows in the wall behind the kid, I can see the last glimmers of sunlight fading over the horizon. We only have until the end of the meal to make our accusation, and none of us are on the same page. Is it possible the chief is trying to simply derail us, keep us distracted with senseless arguing until time runs out? It feels like I'm giving him too much credit. You seem to think you know a lot about me, the chief says to the thin man. What else do you know, huh? I only know what you've shown me tonight. Oh, you sure about that? The chief presses. You sure you don't know any supposed secrets about me? I don't. The chief shoots up from his chair and staggers on tipsy legs. What are we waiting for? It's him. It's gotta be. Let's make the accusation and get the hell out of here. Are you with me, kid? The kid's mouth falls open, but the only sound that comes out is a weak string of ums and uhs. His eyes dart wildly around the room, and for a moment I see them connect with the thin man's. He meets the kid's gaze for only a second before averting his eyes. It's the second time I've caught him doing that. There's something in the thin man's eyes when he looks at that kid. Something that looks like guilt. And a guilty man couldn't be the orchestrator. Guilt implies secrets. How do you two know each other? I ask the thin man, cutting through the mounting tension in the room. We don't know each other. Then why do you keep looking at him like that? A sweat breaks out of the thin man's forehead. I've never met him before. Bullshit, says the chief. You're lying, I follow up. I look at the kid. I'll ask you the same question. How do you two know each other? The possibility dawns on me that more than one of the other dinner guests has orchestrated this game. The thin man and the kid could be in the league with each other. The game may have been rigged from the start. That would make sense. If the goal was to punish us for our secrets, why let us win? I wait for a response. The chief is less patient than me. Say something! The kid's face is paralyzed in fear. You've been awfully quiet tonight, kid, says the chief. Answer the question, now. He's right. I realize now that I haven't heard the kid speak a single word since I sat down. The smell of his rotting meat rakes through my nostrils, threatening to make me sick. What does it mean? The dining hall door is thrust open again, and the servants have returned, hoisting fresh platters over their heads. It's time for the dessert course. We're running out of time. Hey, the chief shouts, rounding unsteadily on one of the servants. Get out of here with that. I'm sick of the bullshit. The chief throws himself at the servant, but he bounces off as if the masked man is made of stone. He tumbles pitifully to the floor. The kid doesn't hold back his laughter this time. His eyes are wide with amusement, and his cackle is the loudest it's been all night. It's directed at the chief, but I feel it drilling into myself in equal measure. The servants place down our final course and lift the lids off all 4 plates simultaneously for the big reveal. A single fortune cookie rests on each of our plates. None of the others seem to notice. The kid is too busy laughing at the chief rolling around drunkenly on the floor, and the thin man looks petrified as he gazes up at the kid. I reach for my cookie and I break it open. I unfold the slip of paper inside that reads, Reckless burning. Felony. 6 years. My sentence. What will happen to me if my secret ever gets out? I feel the muscles in my throat grow tight and struggle for air. The cookies are the final clue, our last chance to win this game. While he's still on the floor, I race over to the chief's plate and crack open his fortune cookie. What do you think you're doing, you bitch? He squeals. I read his fortune, and my heart skips a beat. Reckless driving, hit and run. Vehicular homicide, 20 years. Yeah, some hero. Put that down, the chief hollers. He's finally gotten himself to his feet. I didn't give you permission to read that. The chief grabs my arm and rips the fortune out of my fingers, reading it for himself, and his face goes pale. The kid hasn't stopped laughing at him. Is he laughing at the chief, or is he laughing at all of us? I wrench my arm free from the chief's grasp and stare daggers at the thin man. What does yours say? I demand. He breaks away the cookie and reads his own fortune. His face falls. and he hands me the slip of paper willingly. Coward. Eternal guilt. It's different from mine and the chief's, but no less demanding. I look up at the kid. I'm ready to make an accusation, I announce. The corners of the kid's lips tick upward in a smile. You figured it out? There's an unsettling quality to the kid's voice. It's raspy and feels breathless, like the words simply flowed out of his mouth with no force behind them at all. There's not any doubt in my mind any longer that he's the one who brought us all here. He breaks open his own cookie and presents his fortune to the rest of us. There's nothing on the paper but an image of a skull and crossbones. It's you, but how do you know? The chief asked. There was no one around. How do you know what I did? The kid's smile stretches into a full rictus. It was an accident, the chief cries in a weak attempt at defending himself. There was a fire. I was in a hurry. A fire, I ask, realization slapping me across the cheek. How many years ago was the accident? 2 years, says the chief. My heart pounds in my chest. And you? I ask the thin man. How many years have you been keeping your secret? 2, he says. Of course. We weren't summoned here at random. How could I have not seen that sooner? We were brought in here to be punished, but not individually. We were being punished for the same crime by the victim. It all started with you, Miss Whitaker, says a kid. That's my name. It feels jarring to hear it said aloud in the room. Taboo. How many packs a day did you smoke? The kid wonders. 1, 2? More than you've been willing to admit, that's for sure. And what did you do? You'd smoke those cigarettes down to a nub. You flick them aside. Until one evening, in the fall, a pile of leaves caught fire, and it spread fast. It was you, the chief realizes. You started the fire that night. It was all your fault. I wouldn't be so quick to throw blame around, Chief Bramber says a kid. You were on call that night. But where were you? At the bar, staring down the bottom of a bottle. When that call came in, you didn't want to get in trouble. So you didn't mention the fact that you'd been drinking. You just got behind the wheel in your car and drove off. You were so drunk, you hardly even registered the person standing in the road right in front of you. You only realized when you felt them crumple underneath your tires. But did you stop? Answer me, Chief. I had to get to the fire before it spread any further, Chambers said meekly. No excuses, the kid roars. Did you stop? No. Of course not, the kid smiles unpleasantly. But someone did, right, Mr. Bennett? The thin man recoils at the sound of his own name. As the kid talks, I notice his form begin to change. The skin on his face begins to crack and peel away like aged leather, curling up in sickening ribbons. I realize then that the kid isn't merely someone who has been affected by this tragedy. He's not doing this on someone else's behalf. He is the one. You found me broken on the road, says the kid. You stumbled out of your car and staggered over to me. I was barely clinging to life. And what did you do? You did nothing. For 20 minutes you sat there like an idiot while I died. I was in shock. So was I. And by the time you called the police, it was too late. I was already dead. What do you mean? Chambers asks. The urge to run builds in my gut as I recognize what's happening. Whatever this kid is, he's not human anymore. The human version of him died on that road 2 years ago, and this is what's left. His anger has brought him back in this twisted form to take revenge. I mean that you killed me, Chief. The kid stands and licks his lips. His tongue is as dry and cracked as the rest of his skin, and it peels away another layer from his lips. Blood bubbles up in place of the missing skin. He steps up onto the table and walks slowly across it. I can hear the wood groaning beneath his weight despite the fact that he's thin as a twig. Every step towards Chambers is filled with purpose. I wonder why Chambers isn't running. Is he too scared? Is he too damn drunk? Your crime was the greatest. It only makes sense that I start with you. The kid bends down over Chambers and places a hand on top of his head, and for a moment it looks like nothing's happening. But then I notice the skin flaking up around the kid's knuckles as he squeezes. Pressure builds on Chambers' skull. He begins hauntingly as one eye bulges out of place. A blood-red tear streaks down his face just before his head pops like a water balloon. Viscera sprays across my dress. I feel warm, wet clumps sticking to my skin, but I don't make a sound. I wonder which of us is going to be next, me or Bennett. The kid licks Chambers' blood off his fingers with his cracked tongue. The blood almost seemed to soak into it, revitalizing it. The kid turns around and makes his choice. His eyes fall on Bennett. "No, please," Bennett cries. "I'm sorry." The words are pointless. They won't sway the kid. He hops down from the table and steps up to Bennett. The kid's fingers curl around Bennett's throat. I stay just long enough to see Bennett's skin begin to unfurl in the same way as the kid's before I make a run for it. I charge out of the room, surprised to find the door isn't locked. Bennett's screams are agonizing. I can't help but picture him as the skin slows off in painful strips. I can't slow down, or the same will happen to me. I run straight down the wide, empty hall to the front door, and my heart leaps when I find it unlocked as well. I stagger over to my car and search frantically for my keys. Why can't I find them? My purse! I had a purse and I left it inside. I turn and see the kid silhouetted in the door frame at the front of the manor. I lose all will to keep fighting and try to come to terms with my fate as he slowly walks over to me. I slide down to my knees, feeling the prickle of asphalt against my skin. The kid crouches down in front of me and I prepare myself for the worst pain I think I'll ever experience. I hope at least it will be quick. The kid holds out my palm and drops my car keys to them. My breath hitches as I just look up at him. He's already walking away. Why? I choke out. He turns to face me one last time. You were the only one that tried to change. And then he walks back up to the steps of the manor and closes the door behind him, taking all our secrets with him. Hello everybody, this is Vaxxer99. Welcome to yet another Killer series. And this is going to be episode number 2. And I found this particular short story over on Reddit No Sleep. If you guys have recently submitted, or even years ago submitted a short story that you believe would make a great short story for my new Killer series, be sure you submit your story. Just send me an email, shoot me the link to your short story that you've submitted, or maybe you just read one over on the No Sleep at Reddit that you think would make a great short story. Be sure you submit that to my email submission email address at chillersubmission@yahoo.com. I will definitely be reading all these emails and any short stories that I think are great. If you're the original writer, be sure you let me know. Obviously, that's giving me permission. I am asking permission for every short story that I read from the original author because that's the right thing to do. Again, that's chillersubmission@yahoo.com. That's an email address. Well, I'll be checking and reading those emails and looking for great new short stories to read in upcoming Chillers videos right here on my YouTube channel. So with that, guys, let's go ahead and get started with episode number 2 right here. This short story comes from The White Mare, and the short story will be linked down below in the description. My sister brought home a stray dog. There's something terribly wrong with it. It had been raining for most of the day. Yesterday's forecast was for a light rain shower, but this was torrential. I peeked out at the window, into the darkness in the late afternoon, and I could see a river of rain water cascading down either side of the street. My parents were getting worried about my sister. Emily had spent the day at a friend's house and was supposed to be back an hour ago. Just as my dad was about to get in his car and go drive around the block to try to find her, the front door opened. Emily walked in dressed in her yellow raincoat. Much to my parents' chagrin, she was holding on to a worn collar of an old, soaking wet dog. The thing was a mongrel, but I could make out the Alsatian in it. Maybe some golden retriever. As I tried to work it out, I made a mental note to put a dog breeder down on my list of career interests for school. My parents exchanged apprehensive glances as Emily smiled awkwardly and explained how she found him shivering in the rain on the side of the road. There was something about his eyes, she said, that made her instantly feel sorry for the poor guy. My dad knelt by the dog and had a look at its collar. The collar was battered, its red color fading, and it had no name, phone number, or address written on it. My father stood up with a sigh and told Emily that he'd bring the mutt to the vet on Thursday to see if it had been chipped. And for the 5 days until then, looking after it would be her responsibility. Emily beamed at my dad and took the dog into the kitchen to towel it down. Later on that evening, she brought it back into the living room and informed us that his name was Buster. My father warned against getting too attached, but she didn't listen. She spent the rest of the day playing with Buster and sending pictures of him to all her friends. That night, Buster slept on a makeshift bed of old blankets and cardboard in the kitchen. My parents prayed that he would not make a mess of the place that night. Emily hugged Buster and gave him another treat before rushing off to her room. In the morning, all was well. It looked like Buster hadn't moved an inch. The dopey guy barely looked up at us when we crowded into the kitchen for breakfast. Immediately, Emily knelt beside him, rubbing his tummy and stroking his fur. I think Emily was too afraid of taking Buster for a walk, just in case she bumped into his real owners, and they dragged him away from her. The garden had turned into mud the day before, and there wasn't a chance in hell that my mother would let that dog back into the house if he had a trace of muck on his paws. So he, like the rest of us, spent that day cooped up inside. Not that he seemed to mind at all. My dad cooked up a lamb chop for Buster that night. At Emily's request, it was the most animated I've ever seen him. His eyes lit up as it was placed in front of him, and we all erupted into laughter as he tore into it. That night, I jolted awake. The radio alarm clock on my bedside cabinet informed me, in analog red light, that it was 4:37 a.m. I lay there and quickly began to fall back to sleep. And as I was, I could have sworn I heard something moving around in the hallway. I assumed it was just my dad, stumbling to the bathroom in a drunken stupor, and, for the second time that night, sleep took over me. I spent most of the next day hanging out with friends around town. We rode our bikes, threw stones at the windows of the old house on Mill Street, and dared each other to shoplift from a local off-brand gas station. I made off with a packet of apple-flavored chewing gum. When I came home, things felt different, hostile even. I didn't want to ask what happened, but before I could sneak off to my room, my mother told me. Emily had accidentally knocked over my grandfather's urn while playing with Buster in the front room. I suppressed a chuckle at the thought of how much trouble she'd be getting in. Mature of me, I know. That evening there was silence around the dinner table, broken only by Buster's whining. I woke up again that night. This time I swung myself out of the bed. My mouth was dry and my breath left a stale taste at the back of my throat. I wandered downstairs into the kitchen to get a glass of water. I tried to be as quiet as possible, not wanting to disturb the sleeping dog. Buster slept soundly in his little bed, and I knew a freight train going past wouldn't even wake him. I poured myself a glass of water and drank it in one continuous gulp. And then an idea came to me. I crouched by the cabinet my dad kept his whiskey in. I opened it, trying not to let the hinges creak. I picked out a bottle and stood up. I gently unscrewed the cap and I took a sip. I coughed and choked and I sputtered. As I went for another sip, I heard movement upstairs. I knew my father would kill me if he caught me drinking. I hastily put the cap back on and placed it back into the cupboard. I sped walked out of the kitchen, desperate not to make any noise. Just before I began ascending the stairs, I heard the door to my parents' room open. I quickly turned around and hid in the living room. I heard my father walk down the stairs and walk into the kitchen. My heart was beating like a tribal drum as I hurried out of the living room, and I stepped, agonizingly loudly, up each creaky step back up to my bedroom. I thought I had made it, but just as I was pushing my bedroom door open, I heard a voice behind me, and it was my father. He popped his head out of his bedroom. He asked if it was me moving around. I told him that I had just gone downstairs to get a glass of water. He told me to keep it down, and before he retreated back into the darkness of his room, I saw my mother stirring in the bed behind him, and then he closed the door. That morning I woke up with a migraine headache. Nothing too major, but it was a drawback from what would have otherwise been a great day. My sister was at some dance club, my mother was visiting the solicitor in town, and my father had gone golfing that day. On this rare occasion, I had the house to myself. Well, me and the dog. I found a strongly worded note on the kitchen table when I woke up. It was left by my sister Emily, telling me how I should feed and entertain Buster while she was gone. I crumpled the note up and accepted to throw it into the bin from across the room, but I missed horribly. I made myself the unhealthiest breakfast I could possibly think of. I took it into the living room to eat it while I settled down to watch the film. Dan O'Bannon's Night of the Living Dead, and that's how I spent my morning. Later on, I took my empty plate into the kitchen. I figured if my mother saw that I had cleaned the dishes, she wouldn't be as critical when she found the crumbs. I walked past Buster, who was slumped in his usual spot in the corner of the room, on a bed of now dirty sheets. In a joking manner, I asked him how his day was, while I washed up. Obviously, I got no reply. I remembered my sister's note and set a half-dried glass down while I fetched Buster some treats. I didn't know where Emily kept them, so I grabbed a slice of overly processed ham from the refrigerator. I crouched beside him and dangled it in front of his snout, teasing him. But there was no response. No slow opening of his eyelids, no methodic wag of his tail. There were no signs of life at all coming from Buster. I gasped, and I put my hand on his stomach, trying to feel it rise with his breath, or a heartbeat, or to feel anything. And in my horror, his abdomen began to compress when I did, like a limp, deflating balloon. He just felt hollow and empty. I scrambled to my feet and stumbled backwards. I put my hand on the counter, and with that I knocked over a glass, and it shattered on the kitchen floor. But Buster? He didn't even so much as flinch. I panicked and ran up to my room. I took my phone from my bedside cabinet and hastily rang my mother. It rang for a brief moment before she finally picked up. I managed to stutter out there that something was wrong with the dog, that it was an emergency. She assured me that she had just picked up Emily and she would be home in about 10 minutes. And with that, she hung up. I set my phone down and paced around my room. As I was thinking, I heard a noise coming from the first floor. It sounded like someone moving around. I assumed it was already my mother, home earlier than she estimated. I made my way downstairs to greet her, hurrying over the creaking steps. But there was no one. The door was still locked, and I, as far as I knew, was alone in the house. I heard the now familiar wag of Buster's tail as he came bounding up to me from the hall. I looked at him puzzled as he nestled his head into my legs. I stroked him behind the ears as he mewed low. And then I finally heard the equally familiar jangling of keys as the front door was unlocked. My mother stepped inside, pumping her umbrella. Emily, who was close beside her, ran to Buster and dropped to her knees as soon as she saw him. She hugged him tight and whispered in his flea-bitten ear. I could see her eyes were red, raw from crying. My mother asked me what the big emergency was, and I paused before answering. I explained that he had been unresponsive, but he seems to be fine now. My mother let out a long drawn-out sigh, and she made her way past us and into the kitchen. She called my name, frustrated, and when she saw the broken shards of glass on the kitchen floor. Oh, I had forgotten about that. Emily spent the rest of the day in her room with her dog. At dinner, neither me nor my mother mentioned anything about Buster's false alarm. We just let my dad witter on about improving his backswing, whatever that meant. For the third night in a row, I jolted awake in the small hours of the morning. I groaned about the abrupt ending of a good dream, tossing and turning until I found a comfy position. As I tried to get back to sleep, I began to feel a presence. It was the feeling you get during an awkward silence when you become painfully aware of another person. I sat up in bed and rubbed my eyes, trying to adjust them to the darkness. There was someone in the corner of my room. I was certain of it. I could make out the vague shadow-covered silhouette standing just beyond the foot of my bed. I was almost paralyzed with fear, but my right hand mangled to creep over my bedside cabinet. I fumbled as I felt the familiar twitch of the lamp. Just before I turned on the lamp, the figure in my room bolted. I recoiled in shock as I realized my half-asleep mind had been right. Someone had been standing there watching me. As the moon emerged from a bank of clouds, my room was briefly lit with a dull glow. In the half-light, I saw the outline of a tall man sink out of my room and into the darkness of the hallway. I didn't realize I was screaming until my father burst into my room moments later. He switched on the lights, which burned my eyes. He held me and asked me what was wrong. With snot and tears dripping down my face, I managed to stutter that out there had been someone in my room. At this, my dad turned and ran back to his room. His caring embrace was quickly replaced with my mother's. He emerged with a baseball bat in his hands, gripping that bat so hard that his knuckles were white. My mother went to check on Emily. She made me come with her, not wanting to let her children out of her sight now. We barged into Emily's room. She was already awake, sitting upright in bed. My mother fired a barrage of questions at her, dazed. Emily told us that she hadn't seen anything at all. Finally, my father came back into the room about 10 minutes later. He informed us that he did a sweep of the house and he found nothing. No signs of a break-in at all. No mysterious intruder. He brought me back to my room, and once I was in bed, he sat beside me and explained to me that I had probably just had a bad dream. He said there was nothing to be afraid of, and joked that if someone did break into the house, It'd soon be scared off by Buster, the world's greatest guard dog. Eventually, I mustered the courage to fall back to sleep. The next morning, everyone in the family was noticeably tired, even Buster. We greeted each other with yawns and joked about the previous night's events. I didn't know that this was the start of the last truly happy day of my life. My parents went out shopping. Emily took Buster for his first proper walk, and I spent most of the day gaming. It was a normal day. I've had dozens of days just like this. We had chicken breasts and bland steamed vegetables for dinner. Wednesday was family night, so after dinner we came together in the living room and played a board game. Tonight it was Cluedo. Buster was curled up at Emily's feet. My father thought that was a good time to remind her that tomorrow he was bringing the dog to the vet and would hopefully reunite him with his real owners. And at this, Emily screamed that she was his real owner. He stormed out of the room, Buster following close behind. As soon as she slammed the door behind her, my dad sighed. He said he knew my sister would get too attached to that damn dog. This was the sour note the day ended on. At 10 o'clock, I did my usual routine. I brushed my teeth, changed into my pajamas, and listened to music for about a half an hour or so before turning over and going to sleep. As I expected, I woke up again in the middle of the night. This time, I was simply too afraid to move, too afraid to open my eyes and see what could be lurking in my room. Instead, I kept them tightly shut and tried desperately to go back to sleep. After laying in bed for what felt like hours, it must have been only about 20 minutes though, I decided to open my eyes finally, and I was filled with a directionless dread as I slowly peeped out over my duvet. Since I had woken up, I couldn't shake that uneasy feeling that I was being watched. As I pulled the covers away from my face, I saw who had been staring at me. My bedroom door was wide open, and sitting perfectly still in the doorway was Buster. His head was craned slightly and looking directly at me. Now I chuckled to myself, realizing that I had been terrified about nothing. I swung my legs out of bed, and I got up. I took Buster by the collar and began to lead him back downstairs to his bed. As I walked down the hall, I noticed that the door to my sister's room was ajar. I brought Buster into the kitchen and watched as he laid down in the crumpled mess of cardboard and old blankets that he slept on. I smiled as he slumped his head onto his paws and closed his dreary eyes. I wouldn't exactly call him my best friend, but I would miss him after tomorrow. As I turned to leave to crawl back into bed and finally get some rest, something caught my eye out of the kitchen window. I leaned against the sill and looked out into the cold night sky. The moon was a perfect crescent, half hidden by the clouds. Light pollution from the nearby city robbed the sky of all the stars. But as I stared into the darkness, I caught a glimpse of a shooting star. As I gazed in awe to see if I could see another one, I saw someone. There was a person leaning against the fence along our front driveway. I quickly realized that it was Emily. I couldn't make out much in the darkness, but I could see that she looked nervous. I was about to open the window and call out to her when I heard something behind me. I turned around and realized it was coming from the dog. I assumed he had yelped in his sleep, maybe stuck in some bad dream. But then I noticed something else. His skin was moving. Rather, there was something moving around just under the surface of his skin. What the? I didn't have time to think what it could be before I saw the long, crimson red fingers protrude from his stomach. They grabbed onto either side of the now gaping wound and parted his abdomen like curtains. Once the opening was wide enough, the unnaturally long arm reached out, snaking across the kitchen floor, until it grabbed the dining table's leg. It held onto it tightly as it began to pull the rest of it out of the dog's stomach and abdomen. I couldn't comprehend how something so large could have fit in that animalistic facade. Eventually, it was fully out and it stood upright. The figure must have been at least 3 meters tall. It was hunched over where it met the ceiling. It looked like it had been skinned. Its lanky body was made up of exposed sinew and muscle. The thing's eyes were milk white and bulging out of its vaguely dog-shaped head. It was simply grotesque. With a streak of urine now running down my legs, I turned around and ran as fast as I could upstairs. I burst into my parents' bedroom and stood in front of their bed, screaming and wailing about some monster. They were both shaken awake at my outpour of sheer terror. My father was calm at first. He tried to sit me down and tell me that it had all been just a bad dream, like the night before. I pushed him away and tried to articulate between the screams that there was an actual monster downstairs, and we had to leave now. My father quickly became furious at this. His anger was at me, and it was only amplified by his tiredness. He grabbed my shaking hands and began to shout that at 14, I was simply too old for all this, for any of this. But I was hysterical, and his attempt at reasoning did nothing. As I kept on willing, he and my mother began a half-led, half-dragged me back to my room. Kicking and screaming, I fell onto my bedroom floor. I jolted at the noise of the slamming of my door, and I got to my feet. With tears streaking down my red cheeks, I pounded on the door. I heard my father's voice on the other side pleading with me to just calm down. Our shouting reached a feverish pitch, and then complete silence. We both stopped and listened out of the repetition of the noise that had brought our heated argument to an end. The dull thudding noise came again now, this time accompanied by a shrill creak. I realized that it was the sound of someone or something climbing the stairs. I took a tentative step back as the noise drew closer and closer, and in a weak voice, I heard my father stutter, "What? What are you?" I knew what he had seen. I spent the last 11 years blocking out the memory of what came next. There was screaming and pleading, the sound of flesh ripping and bone shattering. I sat motionless on the carpet of my bedroom floor as viscous blood began seeping in from under my door. The sounds of carnage stopped, and I held my breath as there was perfect silence once again. This silence was broken by the sound of my door slowly creeping open. I was petrified with fear, and I could do nothing. I couldn't move, I couldn't scream, I couldn't even breathe. The thing opened my door a crack before stopping. The slowly thudding noise returned as it walked away from the scene until I couldn't hear anything again. I stayed welded to that spot for a minute or two before grief hit me like a bus. I began sobbing until my eyes were raw. I stood up and took my phone from my bedside cabinet. I dialed 911 and desperately tried to explain what had happened. I glanced out my window and my jaw went slack. Walking down the middle of our street was the creature, caked in blood in the same shade as its taut skin. Holding its hand and walking next to it was my sister, Emily. She stared up at it with sheer affection. The two were illuminated by the street lights, and I saw that the creature was holding the fur suit that it had once been on Buster in the talons of its other hand. I watched as they walked down the street, across the sidewalk, and into the forest that surrounded my neighborhood. And that was the last time I ever saw my sister. Within the hour the police came. They cordoned off the area and took me in. I spent the next few years in foster care. The official statement they had given was that it was a kidnapping gone wrong. Only I and the officers and the coroner who saw my parents' remains knew that it was something much more sinister. That was 11 years ago. And tonight, as I finish writing this, before I begin a journey that I should have undertaken a long, long time ago, my sister Emily is still out there, somewhere. Now, I'm going to find her. Hello everybody, Zaxter99. The upcoming video is my own submission I submitted to a Reddit in a different series than No Sleep back 10 or 11 years ago, and then I took it down as I decided to try to put it up on my YouTube channel, and I read the first couple of chapters on my YouTube channel, but it never really took off because back then I had less than 1,000 subscribers or whatever. So the upcoming story is, call it the first part of a chiller story, a horror story that I started writing 10 years ago. If this video gets enough views, maybe I'll go ahead and continue this as one of my chiller, nighttime horror stories that I've written exclusively myself. So be sure you comment down below. Be sure you like this video if you like it. If you want to hear more of it, want me to write more of it, I would love to do that if that's what people want. So we'll see how many views and how many people are asking for more of Fear of the Dark, a Reddit horror story that I submitted to Reddit more than 10 years ago, and then I finally took down when I uploaded it to YouTube 10 years ago. So here it is, guys, Fear of the Dark, my own writing.
Chapter 1. Shattered Dreams. Emma was sleeping comfortably. Her eyes were in a state of rapid eye movement, REM, when her mother's scream of terror shattered the still night air. She knew her mother's voice well, but a scream like this had never been heard, and when it woke her, chills of terror engulfed her from her head to toe. Her body was now frozen in a fear like she'd never felt in all her life. The summer night air, usually cool at this time of the night with her bedroom window open, now felt thick, heavy, and hot. The soft cotton sheet covering her thin frame felt as if it was pinning her down, trapping her to the mattress of her full-size bed. Instinctively, Emma knew that no imaginary forces were really holding her bedsheet over her body, and that she was really consumed by shock. Every muscle inside of her body felt rigid and tense, ready to leap like a spring, bound tight and then released. Yet despite that, she also felt as if she couldn't move a finger even if she tried to. All she could do was listen as her heartbeat pounded heavy inside of her chest. The scream of her mother faded almost as quickly as it had abruptly broken the silence of the night, and now new horrible sounds could be heard. Emma's eyes looked in the direction of these new strange noises, but the soft lights coming from the starry sky outside of her open-screened window dissipated into the darkness that filled the central hallway. Flesh sounded as if it was being torn, ripped, and shredded by some kind of silent machine unyielding to the human life it was dissecting. Wet and sloppy slurping sounds traveled through the night from the direction of her mother's room, and they grew louder. Perhaps they were getting closer. She really couldn't make out what was making these noises. So she moved her body into a squatting position, her bare feet on her pillow, and her chin just above her upward-pointing knees. As she continued to listen to the slurping sounds, she pictured in her mind a ravenous wolf. Or maybe instead it was a big stray dog, hungrily eating a bowl of thick, moist food. Is that a dog, she wondered to herself, as her bony thin arms wrapped around her legs, tucked into herself, and she tried to hold herself still, as if her own trembling might cause her to fall off of her bed. This all just didn't make any sense. Why was some big dog or other animal feasting in her mother's bedroom? And why had her mother screamed so chillingly loud, yet now she was being so dead silent? "Mom?" Emma pleaded dubiously from her bed, somehow hoping that she'd feel the relief of seeing her mom reach in and turn the lights on to ask her if everything was all right. Like back when she was younger, before her father had died of the stroke that had taken his life so unexpectedly. Emma was just 7 years old back then. Emma's life had been turned upside down when she lost her father at such a young age. 8 years ago now, it was still so fresh in her mind as she anxiously waited for her mother to respond to her calling out to her. Her father had been a local police officer and also a strong protector of both Emma and her mother. Somehow he had always seemed to be there when she needed him the most, like the time when she had been so scared to ride her shiny new lime green bike he had purchased for her 6th birthday present. He had calmly encouraged her not to be scared and that she could do it, as he ran beside her with one hand stretched out, helping her balance her bike until she finally had the courage to take off herself. There was also the time when she had failed her first grade spelling bee in front of her whole class, and came home crying, ashamed and embarrassed. Her mother could always comfort and hold her, but something about her father's voice and his faith in her, it could light a fire inside of her and give her the strength to be her best, and always when she had needed it the most. Boy, could she use him now, she thought to herself. Slithering, oily sounds made Emma imagine 1,000 water snakes all writhing, moving and fighting over a morsel of food as she watched the darkness of the hallway beyond the half-open bedroom door. The slippery, fast-moving snake-like sounds were growing closer, faster than Emma could possibly process her own imagination trying to take over. But she couldn't ignore the reality of her growing fears. These sounds were evil. These sounds had killed her mother just seconds ago. That was the reality that broke a dam and freed tears that burst out from her eyes and flowed down the contours of her pretty cheeks. Emma felt the salt in her tears burn her eyes, and her heart exploded inside her chest with heartache like she hadn't felt since her father died. But there was a determination inside of her now, a desire to live. She swore she could feel her father's presence deep inside of her, and he was urging her to make that leap. Her jump had sprung her from her coiled position on her bed towards her doorway. It was in mid-air that she finally saw it. She desperately pulled her feet up higher as her momentum pushed her over the top of it. Just the glimpse of it that she got was all she needed to feel the panic she already had intensify immediately into uncontrollable body convulsions of sheer fright. It was a massive humanoid-shaped darkness of moving, twisting, thin, vine-like tangles. Each vine creepily moved and slithered like a snake, and each one moved separately and in a completely random direction before finally moving inward towards its dark soul of this unimaginably horrifying creature. The vines moving throughout its lurid form looked wet and grainy, like slimy ash-colored sand. Random specks of crimson red on each moving vine-like tentacle made the beast look like an eerie night sky, twinkling bright stars being replaced by slow-moving small goblets of glowing red blood, moving multi-directionally in and out of its hulkish shape. The fright caused from seeing this evil thing kept Emma from ducking her head in time, and the impact of her head smashing into the hard wooden doorframe sent jolts of pain down through her spine. When she fell to the floor, her ankles gave way and she stumbled forward, falling hard face first into the hallway just outside her room. Several dark, shapeless arms formed from the beast's midsection and shot out like shooting arrows towards Emma's ankles. Quickly wrapping themselves around her ankles, the beast used its newly formed arms like winches to start pulling Emma by her feet inward towards its hungry soul at the center of its flowing, twisting mass. She felt its grip pulling her backwards face first across the carpet. The fresh blood from her nose made a trail from where her face had hit the floor. Her body was numb, however she could feel the trickle of blood flowing through and out of her nostrils, causing a tingling, irritating pain inside her nose. This would be the least of her worries within mere seconds, however, as her feet were about to be pulled right into the living, hissing nightmare. Emma's scream shot out into the night and replicated too closely her own mother's last fearful death cry just a moment in time earlier. Only this scream would not be heard by any other living creature, except for the dark beast itself. Chapter 2. Sliced Up in the Dark. It was pain like she had never felt before. Her toes first, followed quickly by her foot, and it felt like hundreds of razor-sharp knives slicing completely through them. Her brain was in overload from the millions of nerve signals sending her the messages of awful pain. She didn't think about it. She couldn't think about it. She just reacted violently and instinctively. Her leg muscles pulled her torso closer to the beast, chopping away at her left foot, just before her right foot entered its snake-like exterior. And then, with her knees now slightly bent, they snapped rigidly straight and away from this nightmarish horror. Her foot being sliced up stayed inside the beast, and her leg was free. Emma awkwardly fell with a hop right back to her face, just a couple of feet away. The beast reacted just as quickly, however, and once again shot out its tentacles towards her. The tentacles were too late this time, and missed Emma's legs, which stumbled her flailing body away and out into the hall. Her body crashed into the far wall of the hallway, but the wall actually kept her upright as she turned and hopped away on her right foot as quickly as she could manage. She heard the hissing of the dark beast grow louder behind her, and figured that it wasn't far behind, as she made it to her front door. Even though the darkness of her living room made it nearly impossible to see with the long closed drapes over the windows, Emma felt her way quickly, and scared for her life, to unlocking the doorknob and deadbolt above. She threw the door open and crashed through the screen door, which was already unlatched and slightly ajar. However, the front steps of her porch stopped her, as she didn't want to stumble and fall again, with only her right leg supporting her. She felt her heart pound even harder now. Emma knew that she needed time, a few seconds more than she had now, to make an attempt to stagger down the 8 steps of her porch. She had to do something to try to slow the beast down. To close her front door meant turning around to face it once again. But would there be time? When she hopped in place and turned around, she didn't see it, and then realized she also didn't hear its hissing either. Her right leg made a powerful jump to get her back to the front door, and she opened the screen door again to reach in and close the front door. It was right then when she heard those same wet, slithering, snake-like sounds she had heard while sitting up in her bed, not knowing yet then what this thing was. Before she pulled the front door closed to act as a hopeful barrier between this evil dark beast and herself, she searched the darkness of the living room for its shadows. The slithering sounds were coming from beneath where she was looking, however, and when she lowered her eyes, she saw it again. This time it looked completely different than it had looked in her bedroom before. Now the beast looked like a large pile of slowly moving entangled snakes, hissing angrily and almost sounding as if there were some demonic whisper hidden within the hisses. Even though the now shapeless evil was moving slower than Emma expected, it was within just a couple of feet from the open front door where she stood. Emma snapped out of her fixation on the snakes, creeping closer, and her left hand pulled the front door closed. She turned back around, hopping on her right leg to let the screen door slam close behind her as she made her way back towards the steps leading down and towards the street below. As she made her way down the steps, holding onto the railing on the right side, Emma started to feel the pain once again from her left foot that had been chewed up by the beast. She had not even looked at the damage yet in her desperate attempt to escape. However, she knew that something would have to be done soon to prevent blood loss from killing her. She knew she needed a doctor, but getting away from the snake beast was her top priority right now. As she made the bottom of the steps, she held on to the post that made the left side of the entrance arch looking at her house from the street. Using the post to keep her steady, she turned back to look for the beast or the snake pile. There was nothing to be seen. However, just as she thought she heard the snakes hissing near the top of the stairs, she heard a car racing towards her, followed by its horn. It wasn't close enough to be at her house. However, it wasn't very far away either. When Emma turned away from the snakes hissing towards the top of the stairs, back towards the street, she saw that the car was parked in the middle of the street, 2 houses down from her own. The interior lights were on inside the car, and it looked as if a man was looking towards the house across the street and 2 houses down from her own. The honking continued, and the driver of the car seemed to be holding down the horn in an attempt to get someone out of that house and get gone fast. The house, Emma knew, was where Mr. and Mrs. Fredericks lived. They were an elderly couple, both in their 70s, who seemed very friendly every time Emma had briefly spoke to them in the past. They had recently had their granddaughter come to live with them, and she was a pretty, well-shaped lady with long blonde hair in her mid-20s. She didn't know her name, but Emma guessed that she was the target of this man's wild honking in front of the Fredericks' home. Emma let go of her hold on the post and hopped with excitement towards the honking car. After a few hops towards the car, she saw a figure who looked to be the granddaughter of the Fredericks. Emma stood on her right leg and waved her arms above her head and screamed out, "Help me, over here!" as she faced the car and the lady figure running towards it. As the lady opened the opposite front car door of the driver and got inside, Emma continued to scream, "Help me!" and wave her arms back and forth over her head. She knew she needed help, and this might be her only chance. The car turned towards her and sped up as it approached, the bright headlights blinding Emma from seeing the man and the woman inside. The car quickly came to a screeching halt in front of her house. The lights now pointed down the street to her left. Emma heard the man and woman arguing inside the car now, and she also knew that in fact the lady was the Fredericks' granddaughter. She had assumed it was. The dark-haired man barely gave Emma a glance before turning back to the lady and yelling at her, "Damn it, Megan! I told you that your grandfolks would be dead. Now we just got to get the hell out of here." It was right then that Emma's relief of seeing help pull up beside her turned into cold, dark fear. The man turned his gaze back on Emma and now pushed the barrel of a 30-06 rifle from his lap out of his open car window, and it pointed directly at her. The last thing Emma heard was the lady named Megan scream, "Todd, please don't!" in anguish, and then she felt it, and her body collapsed to the ground. That's the end of Chapter 2. Please like, share, and subscribe. I want to thank you guys for tuning in and watching the second chapter of my first ever original novel. Thanks again. This has been Zaxter99.
This story is by Horror Junkie 123 who gave me permission to read his short story, and it's called My Son Told Me That He Ate His Teacher. I'm starting to believe him. Hey kiddo, how was school? I asked, as Dylan trudged through the door. I received no response, just a shrug as he tossed his backpack aside. That type of behavior had become increasingly more common since his father had walked out on us just 3 months prior. I had come to expect a bit of a struggle when it came to opening up to me, but his refusal to make any eye contact indicated that something was wrong. Dylan, did something happen at school today? He meekly glanced up at me, swinging his foot back and forth. Yeah. What was it, sweetie? You can always tell me if something's bothering you. He muttered under his breath, shifting his gaze to the floor. Oh, I'm sorry, honey. What was that? I ate my teacher, Miss Hollingsworth. I ate her, Mom. I was momentarily stunned. What kind of weird confession was that? I was expecting him to tell me that he flunked a math test or got a conduct mark. It was totally out of left field, and I was at a loss for words. Why did you do that? I replied, opting to just play along. This had to be some type of a game. He bit his lip at this, and I could see tears welling in his eyes. I forgot to write my spelling words, so Miss Hollingsworth gave me more homework. I crossed my arms. Well then, it sounds to me like Miss Hollingsworth had it coming. Go get a jump on today's assignment so you don't have to eat any more teachers, all right? Dylan's face lit up like a firework on the 4th of July. Okay, I will. Thanks for not being mad at me, Mom, he said, grabbing his backpack as he bolted to his room. What am I going to do with that boy? I chuckled, turning my attention back to the pot roast simmering on the stove. The next day, I had to drop Dylan off at school myself. For the first time ever, he had missed the bus. I really didn't mind taking him. It would give me a chance to ask Miss Hollingsworth if she knew anything about his odd revelation. But Miss Hollingsworth wasn't there. She had a substitute filling in for her today. I thought it was a strange coincidence, but nothing to worry about. Surely she was just sick today, right? Now, I'm starting to think that's not the case. I was again in the kitchen cooking dinner when I heard the familiar slam of the front door and little feet darting down the hall. Hey, buddy! Silence. Nothing, aside from the door to Dylan's room clicking shut. Odd, but not too out of the ordinary. At least, not until supper. Dylan, it's time for dinner. Just a second. No, food's ready now. Come get it. I said just a second. My blood began to boil. Who the hell did he think he was talking to? I marched up to Dylan's door and threw it open, exposing him playing a new video game. Dylan Lane Webster, you listen. No, Jessica, you listen to me. My blood turned ice. Dylan had never addressed me by my first name before. His voice was suddenly so deep and sinister. When my son turned to face me, I didn't recognize the eyes that locked with mine. Leave me alone, or I will consume you. Mind, body, and soul. Just like I did to your husband. All the blood rushed from my face, and I felt as if I was going to pass out. Did I hear that correctly? What did you say? I squeaked, my voice shaky and uneven now. Dylan didn't respond. He just kept battling his way through the digital zombies on the television screen. I stumbled away, afraid that I was going to faint. I made it to the sofa in the living room, fighting for tears and through the nauseating feeling in my gut now. Dylan's strange confession suddenly didn't feel like a quirky little game anymore. Once I managed to ground myself in reality, I determined that I needed to know. If eating people was jargon for some other method of making them disappear, I was going to get to the bottom of it. I raced to my bedroom and began rifling through the drawer of my bedside table. I tossed aside trinkets of papers until I found what I was looking for. The note from the day that John had left. I kept it just in case I needed it for legal proceedings. And in that moment, I thanked my lucky stars that I did. I turned on the lamp by the bed and began inspecting the note. My heart dropped when I noticed it. It was just what I was afraid of. The letter had been hastily scrawled in Dylan's handwriting. My head spun violently as I compared the note to a letter that Dylan had penned a few months prior, and there was no mistaking it. My husband didn't write that note. My son did. I began to hyperventilate as the weight of the implications bore down on me. This was all too crazy to wrap my head around. My husband, the man whom I had built a life with for over 10 years, might not have walked out on me, actually. It was just too much to process. I must have blacked out because the next thing I knew, sunlight was flooding into my eyes and I could feel little fingers tugging at my blouse. Mommy, Mommy, I missed the bus again. Can you take me? I groggily opened my eyes and glanced at the alarm clock. 7:45 a.m. I shot up from bed, trying to get my bearings. I'd been knocked out for a whole 12 hours. How the hell was that even possible? I didn't have time to mull it over now. I ushered Dylan out of the room while I raced around like a bat out of hell. Come on, buddy. Mommy overslept, I said, emerging with the top halfway on 5 minutes later. All the while, Dylan stood there, quiet as a church mouse. We were only 15 minutes late. Not too bad, all things considering. I peered through the door to Dylan's class when I dropped him off, and Miss Hollingsworth still wasn't there. That was enough to bring all the events from the night prior crashing to the forefront of my mind now. That was right. I was looking into my husband's disappearance. I flew home to go over the evidence once more. I made it back in record time, and I immediately started searching for the note that I had discovered the night before. But now it was gone. I searched up and down for it, in the drawer, under the bed. I even rifled through all the trash cans. Nothing. I knew for a fact that I hadn't thrown it out. So did Dylan take it? That was the only logical explanation. He must have disposed of the letter to erase any proof of his wrongdoing. That, or I was just simply starting to lose it. I honestly couldn't tell which was worse. I took a series of deep breaths and closed my eyes. I knew what I had to do, but I wasn't sure if I had the resolve to go through with it. I unlocked my phone and thumbed through the contacts, pausing when I reached the name I was searching for. My thumb hovered over the call button for a long time before I finally pressed it. My heart jackhammered in my chest with every ring. And just when I thought it was going to voicemail, he answered. Hello? Hi, Miss Daniels, it's Jess. I could hear an audible groan from the other end of the line. What do you want? I wanted to just snap back at her for every fiber of my being, but fortunately, I managed to keep my composure. I was just wondering if you had heard from John recently. He hasn't been home in a few days. And she scoffed. I ain't heard from that boy since his papa's funeral. No thanks to you. Okay, that's all I needed, thanks. I hung up before she could get another word in. John's mother really didn't like me, but she was the only one I could have asked. His father had passed away when he was in college, and he had no other living relatives to speak of. It was beginning to dawn on me that John might not have left on his own free will a few months back. He worked from home and only hung out with his friends every few months or so. His employer had probably assumed that he found another job, and that going ghost was the way of submitting his resignation. John was the type of person who could disappear and no one would bat an eye. No one except for me. I was fairly certain that if Dylan didn't directly cause my husband's disappearance, he had a hand in it at the very least. And I was starting to think that my outlandish theory about eating people being code for something wasn't so crazy after all. Still, though, I needed evidence. I was going to have to catch Dylan in the act. I decided that my best course of action would be to keep a close eye on him while I could brainstorm a bit more of a concrete plan. I had to be cautious about things so that he wouldn't follow through on his threat. When Dylan arrived home from school, I put on my best poker face. A whirlwind of emotions surged through me, but I kept repeating to myself that I only needed to stick it out just a little bit longer. Little did I know that sentiment would hold more truth than I ever thought it would have. "Hey, buddy, how was your day?" I asked, beaming at my son as he trudged through the door. "It was good, Mommy. Can we go to the park later, pretty please? My friend wants to meet me there." I eyed him skeptically. "Oh, yeah? And who might this friend be?" Gillen glanced down and shoved his hands into his pocket. "His name's Josh. You don't know him." "On the playground. Please, Mommy, I really want to go," Gillen insisted, grabbing my hand with his little fingers and staring up at me with his pleading eyes. I pretended to mull it over, shifting my gaze to the ceiling. "Okay, we can go, but only after you finish your homework. Deal?" "Deal, you're the best," he shouted before darting off to his room. Perfect. This would give me a chance to observe Gillen's behavior around other kids. It felt wrong to be going behind my own son's back like that, but I had to get to the bottom of things here. Gillen and I left for the park around 5 o'clock, and when we arrived, a handful of children were already romping around the playground. Once we were within view, a boy with sandy hair and a gap-toothed grin waved Gillen over. My son gave me a quick glance before darting off to meet his friend. I claimed a seat on an empty bench and pulled a book out of my purse. I must have let myself get sucked in because when I looked up, I experienced every parent's worst nightmare. I couldn't find Gillen anywhere. I leapt up from the bench and hurriedly scanned the playground, but he was nowhere in sight. "Gillen! Gillen, where are you?" I yelled, my heart thundering in my chest. While I was suspicious of him, Gillen was still my own son, and he was my entire world, and I would be absolutely devastated if anything had happened to him. I rushed it over to the nearest adults and pleaded with them to help me. Fortunately, they were a sweet elderly couple watching their granddaughter swing on the monkey bars. "I am sorry to bother you, but I can't find my son. His name is Dylan, and he's about this tall with brown hair and blue eyes. I'm pretty sure he has a Reptar shirt on. Have you seen him?" The old woman innocently met my gaze and returned a warm smile. "As a matter of fact, I have. That wouldn't happen to be him over there, would it?" she asked, pointing to a nearby tree line. And she was right. There was Dylan, leading his new friend into the woods. "Oh, thank you so much," I said, before trotting over to the trees. Why was Dylan going in there? He was never one to venture off without my permission. I followed the duo into the underbrush. I was about to call Dylan's name to get him to come back. Whatever was going on, I wanted to be part of it. But in the end, my curiosity won out. I tailed behind the boys, keeping a safe distance and ensuring it didn't make too much noise. They paused in a clearing, and I watched as Dylan surveyed his surroundings. I quickly ducked behind a bush, barely escaping from his line of sight. I had to work to strike my breathing. A feeling of dread had settled down in my stomach. My intuition was telling me that something sinister was about to happen. I peeked my head out from my hiding spot, and I nearly passed out right there. I stayed crouched, just frozen in terror, as my son pushed Josh to the ground with a strength I didn't know he was capable of. He loomed over him and whispered something inaudible. And then his jaw unhinged like an anaconda and began to stretch, wider and wider and wider, until his mouth was nearly the size of a toddler. I simply couldn't believe what I was seeing. Josh was visibly shaking. The poor boy was paralyzed and unable to tear his eyes away from the twisted scene before him. And then, without any warning, Dylan pounced on him. He grabbed Josh and shoved his head inside his gaping maw. He fed his body through the opening, swallowing him inch by inch. The child's guttural shrieks resonated in my ears, growing more and more muffled with each passing second. Once Josh's shoes had disappeared down Dylan's throat, his mouth returned to its normal size, and what he did next will haunt me for the rest of my life. Without turning around, Dylan calmly said,
Mommy, if you tell anyone about what you just saw, you
will be my next meal. All right, Zaxter99 with yet another no sleep chiller story. This one has been written by Genuinely Grim, and they requested me to read this particular short story they wrote a couple of years ago. They said they're anxious to see how this one goes when I read it. So it should be interesting. It's called Our Son Told Us He's Getting Married, but his bride is just a little bit strange. Mom, Dad, we have something we'd like to tell you, my son said, producing a bottle of champagne from his backpack. Hold on, I'll get some glasses. I watched as he scurried across the living room to the glass cabinet, flinging it open and sliding 4 champagne flutes between his fingers. I glanced over at my wife. Her face had turned a light shade of pink and her nails were frantically picking at a scab on her wrist. She was staring at Lindsay, the corners of her mouth twitching ever so slightly. Lindsay smiled back, an amicable expression on her face. Breathe, I whispered to her, and watched as her shoulders tensed up. It's gonna be okay. Lindsay was our son Benjamin's latest. The two were inseparable, and he insisted on bringing her along every time we invited him over for dinner. Benjamin was almost 35 years old, and while we had certainly expected to see him settle down eventually, I suppose we had hoped our son would end up with someone more like him, more like us. Honey, what is the champagne for? My wife asked, her voice quivering. Did you finally get that promotion at work? Benjamin scoffed at this, setting the flutes down on the coffee table and shaking his head. No, they gave that to someone else. Fucking Alistar, of all people. Still, it doesn't matter. Lindsay and I have some far more exciting news, Mom. I could almost feel my wife's anxiety permeating the room. From the corner of my eye, I could see blood trickling from the scab on her wrist now, and I snatched her hand away, gripping it firmly in mine. My son and Lindsay seemed oblivious to the interaction. So, Benjamin began, pouring out the champagne. Mom, Dad, Lindsay and I have been together for more than a year now, and my wife's nails dug into my palm. Well, we love each other dearly, and we wish to spend every waking moment with one another now. Droplets of sweat began forming on my upper lip. So, we've decided to tie the knot. My blood ran cold. My wife had gone pale, and I instantly knew that she felt similar. I could tell by Benjamin's expression that he had expected applause and squeals of delight, but the room was silent, and after a few moments his brow furrowed. What? He snapped. What are you looking at me like that for? Benjamin, I began, playing for time. We understand that Lindsay's important to you, but we cannot in good conscience support this arrangement. What? He sounded bewildered. Why the hell not? Lindsay is the love of my life. I looked over at Lindsay, who was perched at the edge of the couch. Her legs were crossed. She was wearing a black strapless dress that barely covered her upper body and draped loosely over her waist and legs. Her expression remained unchanged. Then, we think it's best you see a professional, my wife interjected. You're such a handsome young man. There are plenty of women out there for you. And there was a sharp whistling sound as Benjamin drew breath and I felt my wife shrinking beside me. Lindsay is a perfect woman for me. Look at her, for God's sake. Show me a girl more perfect than her. She has perfect skin, perfect hair, and she has a body to die for. Plus, he excelled, wiping the sweat away from his forehead, I have to marry her. We're having a baby. My wife and I stared at him, dumbfounded. My brain seemed to be at a loss for how to react. Sweat was pooling under my arms, and a slow chill was creeping up my spine. I wondered if our son had finally lost it. I wondered if this was one of those times where it was acceptable to wrestle a person to the ground and just call the police. Baby, my wife whispered, a hand over her mouth now. But, but how? I knew I had to intervene. I got to my feet and placed my hands on Benjamin's shoulders. Son, Lindsay's not a real person. He is a sex doll. He cannot get pregnant or bear children. You must understand that. Now sit down right here. Let's make a cup of tea so we can all calm down and we can talk about this. And with that, I brushed past him and headed for the kitchen. But Benjamin's next words stopped me in my tracks. You're wrong, Dad, he said, his tone ominous. Lindsay is pregnant. He walked around the couch and propped her up by her arms. And if she isn't, how do you explain this? Benjamin pulled up Lindsay's flowy dress, exposing her lower body, clad in nothing but a pair of lace panties. I recoiled at the sight, but there was something else. A deformed bump in her stomach, far too large to be her small frame. It extended towards her chest, bulging awkwardly in various places, as though it had been stuffed. My wife jumped up from the couch and shrieked, while I stood and stared at her son's exhibition, my skin prickling. What is that? It's our baby, Benjamin rolled his eyes defiantly. Are you blind or something? Benjamin, I said, shaking my head in disbelief. A sex doll cannot reproduce. It cannot give you a baby, son. Please, you're scaring your mother. Benjamin looked like he was about to go on another one of his angry rants, but his mother's expression seemed to ground him. He slumped down on the couch and buried his face with his hands. All right, he said, sorrowfully. All right. When we found out Lindsay couldn't get pregnant, we knew we had to look for other solutions. So we adopted. I stared at him. You adopted? But where's the child? And Benjamin shot me a mournful look. Dad, Lindsay insisted on carrying the pregnancy to term. This chiller story comes from the Reddit No Sleep post. It's from Saturday, and this one's called He Wasn't There to Help. I had a lot going on during the COVID pandemic. My dad passed away from an unrelated illness, and lockdown was driving me mad. I'd always been a bit paranoid, but being locked inside turned it all up to 11. My home was converted into a makeshift prison, an asylum where I was supposed to be my own caretaker. I didn't have much trouble switching to remote work. I usually worked exclusively with overseas clients anyway, so the only thing that really changed was the software, the chair, in my pre-rendered background. But as days turned into weeks, it became increasingly obvious that I wasn't okay. I'd sleep anywhere from 2 to 12 hours a night, and with no discernible pattern. I'd wake up crying without even knowing why. Sometimes I'd even open the bathroom door, as I tricked myself into believing there might be someone on the other side. Having lost my dad, I was feeling more mortal than ever. The news, the internet, and the radio were all saying the same things. Going outside was the end, and at that time of my life, I couldn't handle even more death. Everything feels different when you're forced to stay inside. The walls seem closer, and your chest tightens. It feels like the air grows thinner and warmer. You feel your breaths enter your lungs, but they don't sustain you. Your knickknacks and doodads look like souvenirs from a place you can't go back to. A mockery, like notches on a prison wall. Sometimes when I slept, I'd forget what was going on. Waking up, the nightmare would fall on me like a rock, knocking the air out of my lungs. I'd grow increasingly scared of going to sleep, as if that rock would grow heavy enough to crush me. And yet, it was all better than going out there, among the others. I couldn't take a step outside my own door. Even if the lockdown was to be lifted the same day, there was no way for me to convince myself that everything was going to be just fine. Nothing was fine, and it wouldn't be for some time. My colleague Dana was the first to take notice. I'd been up for about 53 hours, and she pulled me into a chat after a remote meeting, telling me that I looked sick. I melted. I poured my heart out about anything and everything, barely forming a coherent sentence along the way. If someone asked me to recall what I had said that day, I could only hazard a guess. Dana tried to understand, but must have realized that this was above her pay grade. I get it. It's a lot going on right now. A lot for all of us, she said. It might be time to talk to someone. He reminded me that we had an agreement with one of our main partners, Hatchet Pharmaceuticals. They handled our health insurance, which also included mental health treatment. In fact, they'd expanded on it since the start of the pandemic. They got a remote counseling program, she said, holding up a brochure. Just use your company login and sign up for a session. What do you think? Well, there wasn't much to say. I was willing to try anything. I filled out a questionnaire and I got a response within just a couple of hours. I was sent a link to a calendar app and I got to pick a name from a list. There were a couple of short descriptions by each available counselor, giving me a bit of insight into what kind of person they were. There was a man named Gareth who had an empty calendar. It was strange. See, each counselor could be sorted by seniority and number of patients, and Gareth was at the top. He was, by a good margin, their most experienced employee. So how could his schedule be so empty? I signed up for a session with Gareth the very next day. It felt like a stone settling in the pit of my stomach. I was nervous, and I didn't even know why. Maybe it was the prospect of changing routine that scared me, or maybe it was the thought of opening up to a stranger. Either way, it affected me way more than I thought it would. I went back and forth on just canceling the whole thing. I wandered around like a cat on a hot tin roof, feeling walls closing in. I ended up on the floor, gasping for air, curled up in a ball. I just wanted it to be over. I took a day off work to have my first session. It was just past lunchtime. I prepped a cup of Earl Grey and a microwaved Cinnabon for comfort food, but that wouldn't stop my hands from shaking. I got a pop-up on my screen with a blue sunflower logo. Clicking that connect button felt like dipping my heart in ice water. Gareth popped up in a little video feed. He was a man in his late 50s with combed back salt and pepper hair. He had bushy eyebrows, a trimmed goatee, and a white shirt with a black tie. It looked like he was in a large office with wide open windows. It looked pleasant. Very. Good afternoon, he smiled. I'm glad you could make it. It's difficult to take that first step on a new path. It really is, I nodded. But I'm glad you did, he said. Now, how about we talk a little bit about who we are? Would that be all right? We took turns talking about ourselves. We shared our names, our professions, our age, and a little bit about our families. Gareth was 57 years old and had worked as a mental health professional for 23 years. He had two sons who lived in Philadelphia, just like my mom. He spent some time talking about how they'd adapted to the pandemic and how we felt about having to stay inside, wear masks, and the way it affected the way we looked at other people. I barely noticed it, but Gareth had accidentally made me reveal my issues without me even realizing it. He was good, real good. I had told him about how difficult my life felt, that I felt trapped in my own home, but that the outside was even worse. You're describing it like you're selling a frying pan on a sea of fire, Gareth said. Like there's no way out. That must be stressful. He was spot on. It felt hopeless, like spiraling down a black drain. But he just smiled and nodded. We can work with this. I decided to go ahead and see Gareth twice a week, but I could book any time I wanted. His calendar was wide open. I wanted to ask him about it, but I didn't. There was a part of me who didn't want to get too personal. Gareth just seemed nice, but he was also doing his job. I was asked to sit by an open window during work hours as an exercise, a way to get used to the sounds of the outside world. It was nerve-wracking. Every passing car felt like a freight train, and every stray voice from a passerby felt like a threat. But slowly, day by day, it turned into background noise. And with that, the world started to feel just a little bit bigger. The walls breathed again. Over the next few sessions with Gareth, we tried a couple of new exercises, leaving the window open when I slept, leaving the front door unlocked during working hours. And by our fourth session, he asked me to try something new. About half an hour a day right before you go to bed, I want you to just open your front door, he said. Stand or sit there, taking in the sounds of the city. That night, I tried it. I opened the front door and I sat down. I tried to mentally record everything I saw, one thing at a time. The walkway down the road, the ill-kept background. I counted the cars, the windows on nearby buildings, the light posts, the parking meters. I put some conscious thought into observing things from a whole new perspective. But through it all, the one thing that made me want to go back inside was the side of other people. It wasn't just the threat of a spreading pandemic. People seemed nefarious to me, ill-willed, dark silhouettes roaming about in the night, their wants and haves a complete mystery. If the news were an indicator of anything, everyone was struggling to make ends meet. Everyone was a potential assailant. At best, they were indifferent. Perhaps I had it all wrong. Maybe it wasn't the virus closing my throat that was the greatest issue here. Maybe the real problem had been people all along. Looking at the nameless shapes staring at me from the windows across the street, that sentiment felt more true than ever. The more sessions I had with Gareth, the more I realized my priorities were changing. I was letting go of my claustrophobic tendencies, but I couldn't help but feel threatened by the people around the neighborhood instead. Gareth seemed very interested in this, asking me to describe my feelings and mapping out my day. It was very thorough, and I got new exercises to deal with my anxieties. I was asked to record my nightmares and my worries. Another day, I was asked to write down stray thoughts on paper. Another day, we had a session about how to practically deal with intruders and how it made me feel that there might be people out there who wanted to harm me. We talked about the many ways people could disappoint you and how easy it was to just retreat from the public. But I didn't get a good read on Gareth. It seemed to me like he really wasn't trying to treat me anymore. The exercises he suggested did little but to zoom in on the worst feelings that lingered in the back of my mind. My anxieties were emphasized, not examined. But one thing that remained was my nightly routine to sit with an open door, looking out over the neighborhood. I'd stopped mapping the objects I could see, and instead was focusing on the neighbors, strangers walking past in the night. I had convinced myself that they wanted my money, my car, my brand name clothes. They wanted all of it. I had this feeling that if I were to leave my place for a night, I'd come back to it being ransacked, if I came back at all. It was easier just to stay inside. One of those nights, however, I saw something. On the other side of the ruined playground, there were a series of row houses. One of those doors were left wide open, and I could see the shape of someone standing inside the doorway. I could have sworn they were looking straight at me. They didn't move. Were they trying to figure me out? Was this some kind of warning? Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about this potential someone. It's as if I could see them everywhere. And Gareth, he wasn't helping. He was asking for me to describe them, both physical attributes and their actions. It became a bit of a hyperfixation, and I couldn't help myself from seeing them in the corner of my eyes. But the fact was, something was happening out there. I'd see the same person every night, staring at me from across the street. I'd hear footsteps outside the night. Sometimes when I slept, I swear I heard something messing with my letterbox. I felt ridiculous, and I knew I was exaggerating. But was it really all just make-believe? It was a Tuesday when, once again, I logged in to have a session with Gareth. The weather was rough, and some construction work had cut off my high-speed internet. I had to rely on spotty mobile Wi-Fi, and the approaching storm didn't help. Gareth connected, but it took a bit longer than usual. He had the same half smile as always. I noted that he seemed to have good weather, which was a bit of a surprise. I thought he lived in my area. "Mr. Martin," he said, "I'm glad you could join me." I froze. I checked my webcam, making sure it was working properly. The resolution was a bit spotty, but there was no question about it. My face was clear enough. My name is not Martin. Not only should Gareth know that, but he could also see and hear me. It was very strange. I was completely caught off guard. "Of course," I said. "Wouldn't miss it." Gareth sat completely still, looking straight ahead. He was silent for almost a full minute, and then sort of sprung to life. I thought that maybe the storm was interrupting the Wi-Fi, but it seemed to be working just fine. Maybe there was an issue with Gareth's calendar app. But then again, if that was the case, how come he didn't recognize me? "Have you been keeping up with your exercises?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, I have." "So let's hear about it then," he continued. "What did you learn?" "About what?" Gareth leaned back in his chair and chuckled. It was a warm sound, but there was something hollow in it. Then the screen froze, and in a heartbeat he was back to leaning forward, looking straight into the camera. "About your target." I barely had to say anything. This Martin person had come to Gareth for an issue similar to mine, something he had diagnosed as a general anxiety disorder. It seemed like Gareth had poked and prodded Martin in a way that focused their issues on an external threat. Other people. A neighbor. I stood up, stepping away from my laptop and leaving the conversation running. I peered out of my living room window. "What do you think I'll do to this neighbor?" I asked. "We've talked about this," Gareth responded. I know," I repeated. "But I want to hear what you think." "I'm afraid you might murder them." I looked back at the screen. Gareth just stared straight ahead, not moving a muscle. No emotion at all, just a matter-of-fact statement. I felt the moisture on my tongue evaporate as something sour crept up my throat. "And what do you think about that, Gareth?" I asked. He didn't blink. A full 20 seconds of silence passed. The only sound I could hear was my own heartbeat. "I think you're going to do what you need to do to heal," he said. "And I want you to heal, Mr. Martin. At any cost? Of course. There were a couple of people outside, passing by in the night. Someone with a thick coat, another with a trucker cap, one with a backpack, another with her phone, some with their hands in their pockets, someone holding something dark, a gun, a knife. But no one stepped up to my door. No one came knocking. But there was someone standing in an open doorway on the other side of the playground, looking my way, like they'd done so many other nights. Maybe they were making a difficult decision. The meeting with Gareth ran out of time, and I dove onto the net. My hands were shaking so much I could barely spell. I checked it all: the name of the program, the pharmaceutical company, Gareth, everything and anything I could get my hands on. There wasn't much to see. Paper trails came to sudden ends. Names were scrubbed or removed. Most people working on the platform were hired as outside consultants, and there was no way to trace what kind of money they were making or where. And Gareth, he was a puzzle piece. For everything he had told me, none of it was specific enough for me to look it up. There were no names of his children for me to track, no address where he lived, no mention of his previous place of employment. Running out of options, I called up my colleague Dana. It was 11 p.m., but I had to get answers. Dana was skeptical, but she could tell that I was upset. She wasn't enthused about getting back in front of her computer, but I got her to look up a couple of things, and it didn't take her long to find something curious. Hatchet has a company policy about billable consultant hours, she said. They have a maximum number of billable hours. If someone goes past this, they need to be hired as a full-time employee. So does that relate to the remote platform? Well, Gareth and a handful of others go way above this average. They ought to be full-time employees, but there's nothing here that says that they are. So they're bending their own policy a little, so what? Well, there'd be a paper trail, she continued. We have a close association with them. We got access to their meeting protocols. Policy exemptions need to go through the board. So the only way I see it, there is only two ways to make any sense of this. She took off her glasses and leaned into her camera, lowering her voice. Either this program is run illegally, or these people don't exist. I thanked Dana and got back online. There was no way I'd be sleeping that night anyway. A stray thought hit me, and I got back on the calendar app. Even now, in the middle of the night, Gareth was available. I booked an immediate meeting with him, and that gave me an idea. Using my phone and a separate login, I checked his calendar again. According to it, he was free, despite me having booked that time already. So I booked with him again. 2 calls at exactly the same time. And at the same time, a connect button popped up on my phone. I clicked on both buttons at once. Gareth popped up with the same smile as always, sun shining from his open windows. Good evening, Gareth said on my computer. Everything all right? Asked the Gareth on my phone. There were 2 of them, and they were talking at the exact same time. I turned off my phone and I leaned back. My pulse was rising. I had no idea what I was even looking at anymore. I'd been paranoid about people for weeks, maybe even months, but there'd been a mystery in front of my face all along. You're not real, are you? Of course I am, he laughed. I'm right here. Is this what you need to discuss? Are you having issues separating fantasy from reality? No, I spat back. No, you don't get to do that. I'm not imagining this. Now that I don't know what to say, he shrugged. I'm as real as I can be. I'm right here. Then how come you're saying 2 different things on 2 different screens, Gareth? At this, Gareth didn't answer. He looked off screen as if considering something, and then he looked back up at me, still smiling. I'm sorry, he said, but I have an urgent patient issue that I need to resolve. My laptop shut off, Seconds later, my phone went black, and someone was coming up the stairs. Before my heart could skip a beat, something slammed into my front door. I raised my arms as if to shield myself from the sound, and a second later I heard the hinges buckle and snap. And then something broke. Something splintered. I rushed into my kitchen, passing the entrance. There was someone standing by the broken door. I only saw them in passing, dressed in dark, ill-fitting clothes. I grabbed the first sharp thing I could get a hold of. Armed with a kitchen knife, I backed myself up against the wall, knocking over a few doodads in the window. It was a long way down, but if I had to, I'd rather have a shot at breaking a leg rather than dying. But I couldn't get the damn thing open. A stranger stepped into the hallway, about 6'3", dressed in a navy blue hoodie and a black leather jacket. Leather gloves curled around an honest-to-God machete. A face obscured by a burlap sack with holes poked out around wide-open green eyes. Shoulders heaving with excited breaths. He rushed forward, grabbing one of my kitchen chairs and threw it across the room. It broke against the wall, knocking over a photo. Shattered glass covered the floor. Something whistled past my left shoulder and slammed into the kitchen tap with a metallic clang. It made my ears screech. I steadied myself against my kitchen table, and it was casually tossed aside with a crash. I headed straight for the door, but for the first time in months, I didn't consider my anxieties. I had to get out. But then something cold grabbed my neck. Leather gloves. I reached back with my kitchen knife, but I lost my footing among the broken glass. I was sent tumbling to the ground, landing hard on my shoulder. I looked up to see a raised machete and those sparkling green eyes. I had to say something. Anything. Mr. Martin. It was the first thing that came to my mind. The machete hung in the air, ready to fall, but he hesitated. You're Mr. Martin. You're speaking with Gareth, right? There was no response, just excited, heaving breaths and a shaking machete, all frozen in place like a living statue. He's tricking you. He's tricking us. He's not real, Mr. Martin. He's not real. And something clicked. A heavy boot stepped on my wrist, kicking my knife away. The machete crept closer, cold steel resting on my chin. I felt the warmth leave the tip of my fingers. I win, a hoarse voice wheezed. I got you first. I'm not playing any games. I'm really not. For the first time, he blinked. He tilted his head. I continued. I'm not playing, Mr. Martin. You can't be first if I'm not playing. You were trying to get me first. No, I wasn't. You're lying. The tip of the machete pushed into my skin, shaving a couple of hairs and cutting a 2-inch gash across my jaw. Pain like sharp ice spread across my face. And then, a noise. A loud electronic noise. My phone. It must have come back on. Martin stopped. He was having trouble hiding his glee. He was giggling like a schoolboy. This was funny to him, if anything. Answer it, he chuckled. I want them to hear this. I took my phone out, and it was Dana. Answer it, he replied. Put it on the speakerphone. So I did. Dana's voice came through. Something about what we had talked about had kept her up as well. She had always been the kind of person who wouldn't let go of a good mystery. You gotta hear this, she said, going straight into a rant. I think I got something. I held up the phone for Mr. Martin to hear as Dana explained her findings. It turned out the program wasn't supported by our healthcare deal. It was just registered as a support feature. And it was included in the same paperwork. It was never literally spelled out as a healthcare service. Looking into the fine print, it was specified as a technical support feature. Do you get it? She laughed. They're not a mental health care provider at all. They're hired to handle data collection. What? I whispered. They're gathering data. That's their primary function. Data like mental health problems, stress-related issues, ages, locations, trends, dreams, and wants. Or how fast they can get us to kill one another. And Dana laughed. I looked up at Martin, but he wasn't laughing. The machete pierced my phone as he flicked it across the floor. His eyes sunk. He didn't look as excited anymore. His shoulders slumped with a loud sigh. You're not playing, he wheezed. No, I'm not. He took his foot off my arm. I could feel the warmth running back into my fingertips. With a casual stroll of someone headed to the supermarket, he headed for the exit. Without looking back, he shared a few parting words. I would have won. Over the next few days, we lost access to the program. Dana and I couldn't do or say anything. It turns out they had baked more than we'd anticipated in terms of service. It explicitly stated there was an experimental service and wasn't to be used as a substitute for conventional mental health care. It was all just data collection, some artificial program meant to get people talking, engaging them and pushing them to tell them more and more and more, not aiming to help them or guide them at all, but just to get them to return, talk, and stay engaged with the platform. And this Martin guy? It turns out there was no neighbor with that name at all. There was, however, a man who had been found dead in the row house across the street. He had been slashed to pieces and kept in plastic bags in a bathtub. Someone had been squatting there since the beginning of the pandemic. Someone who the neighbors described as a strange man with bright green eyes. I think Gareth was just keeping this murderer engaged, poking him to go further, to do more, and to stay occupied. I don't think it was a conscious decision. It was just algorithms. Oddly enough, I think my paranoid tendencies have eased now. As the pandemic came to an end, I figure something as absurd as this whole thing won't happen to the same person twice. No matter what I run into out there, I don't think it's gonna be another killer. It's freeing in a way. If I can survive this, hell, I can survive anything. Unless Mr. Martin thinks I'm ready to play. This story is by Horror Junkie 123. It's titled My Wife is Participating in a Viral TikTok Trend. She's taking it too far. Oh, that's so creepy, my wife, Anna shouted. I know, right? One of my coworkers sent it to me, Lori said, her attention stuck to the screen. They locked eyes, malicious smirks inching across their faces. You want to try it? Definitely, Lori replied as the sisters shifted their focus onto me now. Um, I'm kind of scared to ask, but what are you trying exactly? Whenever these two got together, they were capable of some real mischief. And oftentimes, it came at my expense. Oh, you'll see, Anna said, handing me her phone. I furrowed my brows as I sank down into the couch. I hesitantly glanced down at the screen, unsure if this was part of the whole ruse. A TikTok video was playing on repeat. There was a woman on screen, her long brown hair partially obscuring her features from view. A wide smile was plastered across her face. Now that alone was creepy, but the way she was standing, it was off-putting. The video just cut out on several occasions, and each time it did, the woman was in a different spot in the house, hiding behind the curtains, crouching under the table, standing on the stairs. All the while, that same manic grin never left her lips, not even once. The man filming was getting audibly more freaked out with every encounter. I kept waiting for some sort of punchline. I thought that eventually the woman would just break the facade and return to her normal self, but she never did. The video ended with a close-up of the woman's bulging eyes as she lunged at the camera, and a guttural shriek from the man who was filming. Once it was over, I hurriedly swiped off the video and breathed a sigh of relief. Oh, okay, I see what you're... I froze. It was only then that I noticed it, that Anna and Lori were gone. They must have walked away at some point while I was watching the video. My heart dropped into my stomach. I really didn't like this trend, but I had a feeling that I was about to witness it firsthand. Anna, Lori, come on. You know I hate this kind of stuff, I shouted, tentatively entering the kitchen. My eyes immediately fell to a pair of feet sticking out from beneath the curtains. I pursed my lips, marching up to the window. I ripped the drapes aside to find Lori standing there, just smiling up at me. Oh, I'm shaking. So scary, I huffed sarcastically, crossing my arms. Lori held her pose for about 5 more seconds before she just couldn't contain her giggles any longer. Ha 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 ha. Okay, you got me, I admit. That wasn't as funny as I thought it'd be. She grinned, covering her mouth. Believe me, I know. Let's go find your sister, okay? Lori nodded, following behind me. Anna, I found Lori. Time for you to come out now. But I received no response. Lori and I continued to scour my home, searching up and down for my wife. Once I reached the top step, I then saw it. The door to our room was slightly ajar, leaving a thin sliver of darkness. I can't explain why, but something about that sent a shiver down my spine. It was as if Anna had wanted me to find her. This whole thing just felt wrong. I took a deep breath, mustering all of my courage, and I pushed open the door. I nearly screamed once I laid my eyes on the scene that awaited me. Anna was standing in the middle of the room. The only light illuminating her features was seeping in from behind me, and the muffled rays trickling in through the curtains. The middle of the room, where my wife was lurking, was drenched in total darkness. Anna stood there, still as a statue, her jet black hair partially obscuring her eyes. Even through the shadows, I could see a nauseatingly wide smile stuck to her lips. My heart jackhammered against my chest, and beads of sweat began to form atop my brow. For the first time in our 12 years of marriage, I was terrified of my own wife. I flipped on the light switch, careful to not take my eyes off of her. Anna, I found you. You can stop now. She completely ignored me. I only knew that she was still breathing by the slight rise and fall of her chest. The silence was deafening. Any luck finding her yet? Lori asked, snatching me from my stupor as she reached the top step. Yeah, I did, I replied, weakly pointing at Anna's motionless form. Lori marched right up to her like it was nothing. Okay, Anna, fun's over. You're about to give your hubby a heart attack. Come on now. My wife didn't respond, however. Lori tried waving her hand in front of Anna's face, but to no avail. She didn't so much as even blink. All right, Anna. Time to give it up. You're starting to freak everyone out, Lori said, clasping her sister by the shoulders and lightly shaking her. Anna slowly turned towards Lori, and then their eyes locked. Lori let out a loud gulp before taking a step backwards. Blood pounded in my ears. There was nothing behind those hazel irises. I didn't even recognize them anymore. Lori backed away, never breaking eye contact until she was standing directly beside me. Cam, let's go downstairs and regroup, okay? She murmured. The panic in her voice made my blood run cold. Yeah, that works for me, I mumbled back. I felt as if we had to speak at a lower volume, like talking above a whisper would cause Anna to break. We crept out of the room, closing the door as we went. Oh, we'll be downstairs, Anna. It'd be nice if you would join us whenever you're ready to give up on this dumb joke. But Anna didn't even acknowledge her sister. Once we made it downstairs, I took a deep breath. Lori sat on the couch, leaning forward and clutching her phone with a vice grip. What should we do, Jam? This was supposed to be some stupid gag, a joke. Anna's always taken these things a bit too far, but this? I've never seen anything like it. She's really scaring me, Jam. I don't know. I've never seen her like this either. Do you think we might be overreacting? I mean, maybe she really is just taking it too far. Even I didn't believe that, but it was the only possible explanation that I could come up with. Yeah, that has to be it. She'll snap out of it soon, right? Yeah, she has to. It wouldn't. The words, however, caught in my throat because I caught Anna peeking around the corner, half of her face hidden from view. Her expression was the exact same as it had been when we'd left her upstairs in the room. Lori traced my gaze until she realized who I was looking at. She instinctively backed away upon making eye contact with her sister again. Em, how long has she been standing there? Lori squeaked, shrinking into the sofa. I have no idea. We didn't even hear her walk down the stairs, and then the three of us sat there in silence. The tension was so thick that even a knife wouldn't have cut through it. I could feel myself beginning to shake. Em, I really hate to do this to you, Lori began, turning towards me, but I can't take this stuff anymore. It's just too much. I'm gonna go home. Just please call me if there's anything that I can do. And please try to get Anna some help if you can, she uttered, grabbing her purse. I could feel the color drain from my face with this. Lori, please don't leave me alone with her. I don't know how to handle this. I'm sorry, I feel bad. I really do. But it's getting late, and my kids, they have school tomorrow. I shouldn't have even stayed out for this long. I nodded, my bottom lip beginning to quiver. All I could muster was a weak, okay. Lori beelined for the door, straight past her immobile sister. Hannah didn't even twitch. Instead, she opted to remain watching me the entire time. Once the front door slammed shut, the pit in my stomach grew even deeper. I was at a loss for words. My wife and I stood there in a sickening staring match, neither of us even blinking. The smile on our face, it never wavered. But in fact, once the door shut, I could have swore that I saw it stretch just a little bit wider. I don't know if it was the stress or the fear or Lori's sudden betrayal, but something in me then snapped. This was just silly. Anna was obviously still running with that stupid TikTok challenge, and I was feeding right into it, hook, line, and sinker. I started to get angry. All right, Anna, you just stand there as long as you want. I don't care. When you're ready to talk about this like adults, I'll be finishing up some work on my laptop. But she didn't respond. My wife just kept staring at me with that same Cheshire grin plastered to her lips. Fine by me, I was done buying into whatever game she was playing. I sank down into my armchair and picked up my laptop, careful to keep Anna in my peripheral vision. Something deep down told me that I needed to keep her in my line of sight. I opened up my laptop, trying to distract myself from Anna's strange behavior by doing some research for an article I was writing. But I just couldn't seem to get it together. It was almost impossible to focus on a task when you can feel someone just staring at you. I sighed. 30 minutes later, and I hadn't even digested a single word of anything I'd read. This was going nowhere. I was preparing to try to communicate with my stock-still wife again, but then I heard it. Something near the doorway skittered across the floor. I slowly glanced up to where Anna had been standing for nearly an hour, but she was gone. I strained my ears, listening for anything that might clue me in as to where she might have went. The only sounds that I heard were my own labored breathing and the rapid pounding of my own heart. My fingers quivered. I didn't know if I had the strength to do it, but I had to know. With trembling hands, I closed the lid on my laptop just enough to see over it. I nearly screamed as it clattered to the floor. I scrambled out of my seat and backed up until I was pressed against the wall. Anna was on all fours, frozen mid-stride. She just smiled up at me, creepily, again staying still as a statue after I noticed her. Something instantly caught my attention. It was her eyes. I had never seen anything like them before. Her eyes were hungry, predatory. I I was their target. I failed to calm myself down as I slunk around the perimeter of the living room, careful not to break eye contact with her. Once I reached the stairs, I bolted up the stairs, taking 3 steps at a time until I reached the top landing. I burst into our bedroom, slammed the door shut, and made sure it was locked. I was safe, or so I thought. What the hell is going on? This is insane, I said out loud, patting my pockets and trying to find my phone. And then a sickening realization crashed over me like a tidal wave. I'd left my damn phone on the coffee table where I was working on my laptop. We didn't have a landline either, so now I was trapped. I began to hyperventilate and pace around the bedroom. What was I supposed to do? My car keys were in the bowl downstairs, so even if I was able to climb out of the window, I'd have to go back inside to get them. Running to a neighbor's house was out of the question. We lived on a secluded road, and we didn't even know the nearest people to us. In the end, I concluded that I had no other option but to try to sleep it off and just hope that my wife was back to normal in the morning. I slipped into a t-shirt and gym shorts before laying in my bed. I knew that I probably wasn't going to get a wink of sleep, but I had to give it a try. It was the only thing I could do now. I turned the lamp off, and the room was bathed in darkness, aside from the faint yellow glow trickling in from underneath the door. Right before I closed my eyes, however, I noticed something that ensured I stayed wide awake. I could barely make out someone's feet blocking the light now. I shuddered. How long had she been standing there? I didn't even want to know that answer. I suddenly heard the doorknob begin to jiggle, and then my heart it raced like a piston, and I could feel all the blood rush from my face. How could I have forgotten? I keep a spare key stashed on top of the door frame for emergencies. This was it. I was cornered. The door slowly creaked open, and I could see a glimmer of Anna's stark white teeth through the opening. Her eyes were bloodshot, and rightfully so. I hadn't even seen her blink a single time. I couldn't move a muscle. I was paralyzed with fear, waiting for my wife to scamper across the floor and do God knows what to me. But she never did. I don't know how long we spent staring at each other, but it must have been hours. In that entire time, her mouth didn't so much as twitch. That twisted, awkward smile remained stuck to her lips like she was a figure in a horror painting. I don't know, but eventually I must have nodded off, because when I opened my eyes again, Anna was there no longer. She was gone. The house was pitch black, save for the moonlight shining through the downstairs windows. And I could feel it. I could feel her, like a presence looming over me. Every synapse in my brain screamed at me to stay where I was, to wait it out and pray that nothing would happen. But I couldn't do it. I steeled my resolve, ready to fight if I had to. I flipped onto my back, fully expecting to find my wife hovering over me with some sort of weapon in hand, but she wasn't there. My eyes grew wide. I hurriedly scanned the room. I didn't find her. This was my chance. I crept to the door, stifling my breathing as much as possible. The house was eerily silent. Once I made it to the stairs, I peered down them, squinting to see in the dark. The coast was clear. I tiptoed down each step, being careful to avoid the creaky ones to the best of my ability. I felt nauseated. I could feel eyes on the back of my neck wherever I went, like I was a lamb being led to the slaughter in the supported safety of my own damn home. Once I reached the bottom, I peeked around the corner to the living room. I immediately noticed something strange. The back door was hanging wide open, and the porch light was on. I drifted over to it like a moth to a flame, picking up my phone along the way. Nothing could have prepared me for what I saw when I looked outside. Anna was sitting on her haunches, crouched over something in the yard. Her long hair prevented me from seeing what she was doing. And then all of a sudden, as if on instinct, she snapped her head around towards me with a sickening speed. When our eyes locked, I felt like I was just going to pass out. My wife was holding the carcass of a dead rat. She had devoured a large chunk of it, entrails, bones, and blood oozing from the rear end of it. But that wasn't the worst part. Somehow, even while ravaging a dead animal, Anna was still smiling that same creepy smile. My flight or fight response kicked into overdrive, and I slammed the back door shut and raced through the kitchen as fast as my legs could carry me, snatching my keys along the way. I shot out the front door at lightning speed, not bothering to close it behind me. I leapt into the driver's seat of my Chevy, and I stepped on the gas. As my truck kicked up dust, I happened to glance in the rearview mirror. I released a horrified shriek at what I saw. Anna was standing under the garage light. She just watched me leave, that wide, bloody smile still plastered across her face. I don't know where I'm going. I doubt the cops will be of any help. I don't think Anna has technically done anything illegal, so their hands would probably be tied. I just had to get out of that house. I've parked at a truck stop for now, until I can get my thoughts together. Even though I've made my escape, I'm still downright horrified, but not for the reasons you might think. I can't explain it, but ever since I left, I haven't been able to stop smiling. The story is called Someone Took My Dead Name. It's by Saturday over on No Sleep. You can call me James. I have a two-story home in a small town. I have two dogs, a girlfriend, and plenty of interest. I like hobby carpentry, and I work as an electrician. I'm a bit of an audio enthusiast as well, and I love tinkering with sound systems. I have made my life here over the past 15 years, and I turned 32 not too long ago. But this is not a story about what I am. That's a story in and of itself. I want to tell you about something that happened to me. I moved away from my hometown years ago. and I don't have a lot of friends from that time. I had to move. I had to start my own life in a place where I could make my own choices without the past weighing me down. I don't really like to talk about it. But before I was James, I was Julie. Yes, I am a trans. I tried so hard to be Julie. I tried to like all the things that you're supposed to like, and I tried to look the part. At times, I even enjoyed it. But I began to journey, become James. And after years of struggle and pain, I finally became a person I've grown to love and appreciate. I don't like to bring up the past, but sometimes you don't have a choice. Not that long ago, an old acquaintance from my hometown reached out to me. We are still on speaking terms, but we rarely talk more than once or twice a year. So when they reach out, it's usually for a good reason. And this time, it was. They showed me a local news clip. It was a segment captured on a security camera. According to the narrator, it showed the last sighting of a man who was found dead the following day. The man was seen following an unknown woman into an alleyway, where they would later find him. The police was looking for this unknown woman and urged people to reach out if they recognized her. And then they showed a picture of her. I'll never forget the feeling of my heart sinking into my stomach when the picture of Julie showed up on my screen. The unknown woman was all too known to me. It was someone I used to be. I was losing my goddamn mind. It wasn't a matter of mistaken identity. It was me. It was a face I'd seen in the mirror countless times. I'd left that part of me behind. But now here it was on the screen. Looking back at that clip, it was even my kind of clothes, my kind of hair, and my kind of makeup. Overnight, people that hadn't heard from me in years reached out to me. Most of them meant well, or they were just confused. I didn't know you changed back, someone wrote. I didn't know you could do that. Others were happy for me, explaining the joy they'd felt that I'd returned. But it was all about what they wanted to express. They didn't care about the reality of the situation, which was unexplainable. There was no Julie. Julie had been gone for years now. And yet, I was seeing her on the local news. The tipping point came when I was visited by two police officers. They took me out of my home and questioned me for the better part of an hour. I had to explain the reality of my life to them, that I had gone through treatment to become a whole new person. I had to explain it in detail, and show them that in no way, shape, or form could I still be Julie. It was physically impossible. I had to provide an alibi. And at the end of it, I still wasn't cleared. They didn't really understand. To have a life you've crafted for yourself torn out of the ground like that is devastating. To the people in my community, I'm just James. I've always been just James. But all of a sudden there were whispers, rumors. Maybe there was just a little Julie left in me, they thought. Maybe I was doing something I shouldn't. Maybe I was the deviant they had always suspected. So I decided to look into it myself. Not just because I'd been accused of a crime I didn't commit, but because of something I couldn't explain. There couldn't be a Julie, and yet there was. It was a long drive back to my hometown. I come from a particularly red part of a red state, and while I don't like to paint people in a bad light, there were those who refused to let me move on. Back then, I felt like the only way to truly reinvent myself was to leave it all behind. Not just a name or a look, but the place and the people. It hurt more than I thought it would. Change like that can be painful, even for the better. You lose the good things too, you know? Seeing the streets I used to walk was surreal. It's like the world had gotten smaller. The colors had faded. The trees had grown taller. It was a town of about 18,000, but it was shrinking year by year. You could tell there was nothing new around. Buildings that were abandoned stayed abandoned, and people that moved away, they just rarely came back. I suppose I was sort of an exception, but not a willing one. I checked into a motel and started a bit of investigation on my own the following day. I asked around town to see what people had to say, referencing the news story. A couple of folks were happy to oblige, but others were a bit wary of outsiders. It was comforting in a way, being spoken to as a stranger. It reaffirmed my identity at a time when I really needed it. But a few kind of recognized me. Most didn't, however. I don't have a lot of photos of me online, and most of my social media profiles just have this picture of a hermit crab, my favorite animal. Something about a crab named James cracks me up. But I still got recognized every now and then, which completely sidelined the conversation. There was this one woman waitressing at a rest stop that used to go to my high school that instantly recognized me, but not in a good way. Your skin thickens after living my life for a while, and it's a very different feeling when it's people that you used to know. Their jabs cut even deeper, even when they mean well. You used to be so pretty. Well, screw you too, I guess. After a full day of running into walls, I decided to throw a couple of Hail Marys. I figured if this was someone trying to emulate me, maybe I should trust my own instincts. I had to put myself back in the mind of that person and work myself backwards. Where would Julie go? And what would Julie do? There used to be this space beneath a highway where I'd go with all my friends after school. We'd hang out and watch videos there all the time. Sometimes we'd even share a beer or gossip. Looking back at it now, I was probably the only normal kid there. Others were going through their goth or a prep phase. I was going through my Julie phase. I just didn't know it yet. I don't think they did either. I could have found my way back there with my eyes closed. While the path was a bit overgrown, I'd still see it as bright as day, even with the sun setting on the horizon. Spring just hits differently. It makes you think of the end of school. It was the same concrete mess as always, the same columns with the same graffiti. Some that I recognized, some that I didn't. I traced my fingers along the familiar colors and patterns, looking for anything out of place. Admittedly, my memory was a bit hazy, but some things, they just stick, like a lingering feeling after a long dream. As I sat down to ponder my next move, I knocked over a glass bottle. It looked brand new. Picking it up, I recognized it as a local brew, the kind that we used to sneak off with after school, and it was my favorite. A brand new bottle. Just one. And it used to be my favorite. What are the odds of that? Coming back to the motel that night, I realized something. As much as it pained me, I had to put James aside. I had to think about Julie now. The things she liked, the places she'd been, and a couple of ideas came to mind. For example, there'd been this idea that Julie had this crush on a guy named Dawson. It was never the case, but I really tried to convince myself that it was, even when it wasn't. Everyone was so positive about hearing it that it just felt good to spread the rumor, even when it wasn't true. It just made me feel a bit more normal. If Julie was still around, and if she was the Juliest of Julies, she'd definitely follow Dawson around like a puppy in love. A quick search later, and it turns out that Dawson had never moved out of town. He got a job at a local brewery, moved a little further out, and he got married. He even had 2 kids now. His social media had been set to private. His wife's social media wasn't, though, and from the looks of it, he was very unhappy. A couple of her posts were pretty telling. How do you block spam texts? Can you block text messages when they keep switching numbers? His phone stays off, until you stop fucking calling. So she was still around. She was still doing Julie things. That gave me something to go on. The next day, I took a drive around town. I put on a decades-old playlist to get in the mood, but I couldn't stop cringing. All these stupid songs about the real me and being seen. I kind of wanted to grab a hold of my old self and just tell her to stop pretending. Then again, maybe I'd get a chance to after all. I tried to consider what I would have done if I'd stayed in town, if I'd kept on being Julie. I probably would have gone to a trade school or taken night classes. I probably would have overcompensated and done something overly feminine, like cosmetology or maybe hairdressing. To be fair, I used to be an absolute beast with makeup. I could put anyone in drag in 10 minutes flat. There was a place in the next town over where they taught cosmetology. I had a faint memory of looking through a brochure. There were even apartments one could rent for a small fee on top of your tuition. You could also do some work in one of the salons as a part-time thing. It'd be tough without a support network, but it'd be the kind of thing Julie would have totally gone for. I took a drive to the next town over, but I'd completely overestimated the time. The sun had already set when I rolled off the highway. As the apartment complex loomed in the distance, I couldn't help but feel a bit divided. On the one hand, I really wanted answers. On the other, I wanted to turn my back on the whole darn thing. What would it mean to be right? How would I react to something impossible being real? I pulled into a parking lot and got out. I didn't know where to start. Instead, I just wandered around a bit, trying to put myself into the right frame of mind. There was this electric moped at the end of the lot. It looked cheap, but it was kind of cute. It had the right colors, white and a muted winter green. Just retro enough for the old me to keep my eye on it, but modern enough to be a convenience. I could definitely see myself getting one of those back in the day. In fact, looking around the parking lot, I couldn't see any other vehicle that even remotely looked like something I'd go for. I decided to follow my gut. The moped was parked at the end of the lot. If I had an apartment, I'd have to have it close by. I'd never go for a place on the first floor, so it had to be on the second or third. The apartment complex was unlocked, so I just wandered in. There were names printed on the doors, but none that I recognized. I just wandered floor to floor, listening, trying to catch some kind of stray vibe. I made it all the way to the third floor when a door creaked open. I held my breath. I was already sort of trespassing, and a creepy guy in an apartment complex with mainly young women might warrant some unwanted attention. I'd already talked to the cops one times too many. There was someone on the floor below. I heard someone closing the door and humming something. I couldn't put my finger on what, but it felt familiar. Even though I couldn't remember the lyrics, I could feel my foot tapping on its own. It wasn't until those footsteps disappeared down the stairs that I remembered it. Place in this world, Taylor Swift. How could I forget that? That used to be my goddamn anthem. There was a small window in the hallway overlooking the parking lot. I could see someone putting on a helmet and getting on that electric moped. It was a long shot, but I hadn't gotten this far for nothing. Checking out the apartment door, I noticed the name of it being Jolene. I felt like an idiot. That had been my nickname for a time when I went through my country phase. Of course she wouldn't use her real name, or maybe she was trying to distance herself from something. I thought about my next move. I could come back later, but I felt like I had to try something. Looking around, I noticed something in the corner. A crack in the floor tiles. The perfect spot for me, or Julie, to hide a spare key. Ah, and there it was. I considered stepping away, but I didn't know if I'd ever get this chance again. If I turned my back on this whole thing now, could I ever live with a mystery? There had to be an explanation, and I couldn't even imagine it. So despite my common sense screaming at me to think about it, I took a deep breath and I went ahead. I used the spare key and stepped inside. It felt like walking back in time. The same posters, the same smells, the same coats on the coat rack. Every single thing in that place was something I would have picked out myself back in the day. The shoes, the white lamp with the blue sunflower pattern, the plate for the keys on the dresser. I even had these little plastic hermit crabs next to it. It was all just my style. This could have been me 15 years ago. But what bothered me the most was something small. On the dresser in the hallway, there was a series of post-it notes. The kind I'd write as a reminder to myself. Things to buy, people to call, that sort of thing. There were these everyday notes on there, but it was the way they were written that bothered me. It was my handwriting, the one thing I hadn't bothered to practice away. I walked in past a well-vacuumed 70s style rug, taking in the atmosphere of the place. The laptop in rest mode, probably ready to stream something. The spinning fan lamp overhead, still slowing down from being on all day. There was even those fridge poetry magnets in the kitchen, where you can spell out sentences with random words. I used to love those things. But looking a bit closer, those magnets told the story. It read, Dream of you. Ocean of nothing. Listen, listen, hear, hold, remember, remember, nothing. Jay. I snapped a picture of it with my phone as I heard something. Someone was moving up the staircase outside. How could she be back so fast? I panicked. My first thought was hiding in the bedroom, but the bed was too close to the ground for me to fit underneath. In the wardrobe, it was just too thin. I had to try something else. I opened the bathroom door and tried the lights, but they didn't work. I didn't have a choice though, so I hurried inside, closed the door, and felt my way to the back of the room. There was no bathtub, but a pretty sizable shower with a curtain. I could hide behind that. I heard the front door open. Good thing I'd locked it. I held my breath and closed my eyes. Something primal in me figured that if I didn't see her, she wouldn't be able to see me. My sweaty palms pressed up against the tiled wall. Damn it, damn it, damn it, someone muttered. Where is that? Oh. There was a deep sigh, and keys rattling, and then someone turning to leave. Got it, she called out. I'll be there in 10. It was eerie. It was like hearing yourself in an old recording. And as the door clicked, I was left there just panting in the dark. I almost stumbled on something as I felt my way forward, trying to find a working light switch. I couldn't find one, but I felt something strange. There were these patches of warm plastic littering the sink. I couldn't remember ever feeling something like that before. There were also other shapes, thicker, with an unusual texture. Lips? Eyebrows? Fingers? I didn't stop to think. Instead, I threw the door open, unlocked the front door, and I hurried outside. I almost forgot to put the backup keys back, so I had to turn back when I was halfway down the stairs. My heart, it just wouldn't stop pounding. The moment I got outside, I doubled over and did my best to hold back a scream. What the hell was I doing? I figured I'd call the police with an anonymous tip the next day. Maybe the best thing would be for me to just walk away. But then I'd never know for sure. Coming back to the motel, I took a shower and I crashed. I stayed up for about an hour watching cheap reality TV. I'd barely had anything to eat, and a mild shake in my hand didn't let me forget it. Somewhere around midnight, I decided to get something to eat from a vending machine outside. I lumbered outside and checked the codes on the machine for a bag of snacks and a root beer. It's E21. My hand froze. I turned to my left, and there she was. She still looked like a 17-year-old. She had the exact same hair, the same clothes, and the same accessories. Even the accent that I had tried to leave behind. She had her hands behind her back, bouncing back and forth on her heels. Something that I used to do when frustrated or excited. "Who the hell are you?" I asked. "I reckon you know who I am," she smiled back. "Now why the fuck are you following me?" "What are you talking about?" "You think I wouldn't find you?" she answered. "Like I couldn't put myself in your shoes?" She stepped closer, and I stepped backwards, and she found that amusing and crossed her arms. Her cheek twitched a little, but she just blinked it away. "I'm my own person," she continued. "You don't get to fuck with that." "I don't even know what you are," I said. "You can't be—" "I'm Julie," she interrupted. "Wait a minute, you can't be." "But I am." Before I could protest, she stomped her foot, and as she did, she got this sudden limp in her right side, like part of her body fell out of balance. Her hand shot up to her face, and I could see something loosen at the edge of her cheek, like a tear in the skin. "If you fuck with me, I'll make ribbons from your lungs." Her voice was different now. It had a higher pitch and a whistle to it. She was leaking air through her throat like a balloon. She was so damn angry that she was breaking at the seams. She had a twitch to her head, like a wounded insect. Her face seemed to be acting up, making her blink like she had got something stuck in her eye. She never turned her back on me, but she stepped away. By the time she rounded a corner, I could tell she was limping, not from pain, but from imbalance. Hurrying back into my room, I felt like I was having a panic attack. My mind was racing. I locked my door and pulled the curtains. I checked the windows. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. It was like I'd seen an alien. It was like something that couldn't be. I couldn't make heads or tails of it. It was so far out of my world view that I couldn't wrap my head around it. I called my girlfriend, but ended up stammering. I couldn't even explain what I'd seen. Instead, I just said I'd been threatened. She was still being rational about the whole thing and made me promise to listen. She pleaded with me. She told me to go home first thing in the morning and to call the police. So that was the plan. I didn't know if it was the right thing to do, but I knew better than to dig myself in any deeper. Early the next morning, I checked out. I got in my car and I called the police. I left an anonymous tip about the murderer, telling them her address. They asked me for details and contact information, but I just hung up. I was done, and I was going home. This whole trip had just made me sick, and I couldn't wait to leave Julie behind once and for all. I was on the road before the morning fog cleared. I made some decent distance in a couple of hours, and I decided to stop to have a sandwich. There was this great place that I used to stop at with my parents when we went to see my aunt in the summer, and I figured that it'd be a nice goodbye to that part of my life as I left for the final time. I pumped some gas, got my sandwich, and went to the restroom. As I turned to close the door, I saw something in the distance, just off the side of the parking lot, leaning up against a tree. It was a retro-style winter green electric moped. A large hand slammed the door shut, locked the door, and turned off the lights. And I was standing there in the dark, hearing two sets of breaths, one of which was right across from me. "You couldn't just let me go," Julie whispered. "You couldn't just leave me alone." "I don't even know what you are," I said. "But you're not Julie. You can't be." And there was no response. I could hear her breathing growing deeper, longer, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to say something. "Are you even human?" There was a painful sound, like a simultaneous eruption of a groan and a sob, and then something unsettlingly human, a frustrated grunt. She was pacing, as if trying to calm herself, and I kept hearing a smacking sound, like she was slapping herself. No, she muttered. No, no, calm. I'm Julie. I'm Julie. I'm me. Something split, like a ripe tomato hitting the floor. Something coarse scratched against the bathroom tiles. Deep breaths rose higher into the air as something wet slapped against the floor with a thud. Several sharp things tapped against the bathroom tiles on both sides of the restroom, at least 8 feet wide. I'm not. I'm not okay. No. Not. Not. Fuck. A silence then filled the room. I could hear the blood pumping in my ears as my fingers ran cold. Something in the dark was moving ever so slightly. A voice pierced the air, a low rumbling, like a stalling engine. A painful, unnatural moan. I can't go back. I can't. And before I could speak, something pushed against my face. A blunted spike. First, it touched my nose, and then it pushed into my nostrils, and then to my ears. A sliver trickled as it slipped under my eyelid, and all the way into the back of my throat. I tasted blood. I smelled blood. I could hear cartilage breaking from the inside as I fell backwards, lifting a foot into the air by my head alone. And then, nothing. It wasn't painful. I know that's strange to say, but it wasn't. Julie was changing. She was taking over. She was consuming not just my body, but my identity. She was slouching off whatever she had been and turned to become something new. Me. I could feel a part of James being tossed out now, like gutting the soul of a fish. I'm sure you've heard of near-death experiences. People looking down on their own bodies from above, and that's what I felt, but from a completely different perspective. I wasn't looking down at my body. I was looking back at this thing. I think it literally attached itself to my brainstem, sending a shock of impressions through my whole nervous system. I'd been right. It wasn't human, but it wasn't really anything. It was half finished, partial. Something from another place had forgotten what it was like to be a person. It was in pain and desperate to feel something physical, something real. So it had floated in space where people can't be. It had dreamt of forgotten things, things thrown away. And in that space, it seemed beautiful and abandoned, Julie. The impressions felt like watching life through shadows on a wall. Intentional, but only indication. Unreal. It had taken something it thought abandoned and believed itself to be something new. It refused to be what it couldn't be. It was human, because it had to be. It couldn't go back. It couldn't return to being nothing. The dead man had been a challenge. He had recognized Julie, and when he told her she couldn't be Julie, she'd done what she'd done today and attacked. And her loosely worn dream had torn at the seams, revealing something unreal, inhuman, and dangerous. And now she was doing it again. You're killing me, I thought. You're killing everything. I could feel my lips moving, stopped only by something coarse brushing against my teeth, like the bristles of a steel brush. I'll be who I need to be. I could feel my arms moving, my legs straightening, something trying to adjust from the inside out, but there was trouble there, a discomfort. You don't like it, I thought. You don't want to be James. It didn't think back. It hesitated. The shadows playing in my mind stopped to listen. If you're Julie, you can't also be James. You don't get to decide who I am. I could feel frustration, hands pulling at hair, feet stomping, trying to feel the size of their shoes, deep, uncomfortable breaths smacking their tongue from a distasteful sensation. Julie didn't like this. She didn't. Just go back, I thought. You'll be you, and I'll be me. Fuck you. Just walk away, I insisted, and never look back. No. There was a throbbing pain in my back as I was dropped to the ground. It was distant, but it was there. Something curled around my neck, pressing on my windpipe. It was afraid. It just wanted to be Julie. It wanted there to be no more questions, no more people. It didn't want to spin a new web into a body. Repairs could take weeks. It didn't have enough patches, not even at the lair. They would have to get to a new lair. And now that the police had raided it, you fucked up, it groaned. You fucked it all up. You can't just take something, I thought. It's not yours. It was getting harder to think. The shadows in my mind were fading. It was just colors in a river. Recognition glinting in a deepening stream, like fool's gold. She's mine, it rumbled. As recognition faded, like dying stars, a single thought crossed my mind. You know what? You can have her. It felt like having roots pulled out of my core. Something pulling back, leaving my face bloodied and bruised. The restroom door opened ajar, letting in a glimpse of light. Something large and inhuman covered the exit, gently caressing an empty human body. A familiar blonde head hung loose, like a stringless puppet. Something sharp and claw-like stroked her head, cared for her. I don't want to be James, it groaned. I tried to say something, but I choked on a loose tooth. I spat it out with a deep red glob. As Julie slipped out the door and into the adjoining woods, the last thing I heard was that same hum and a whistle as before. That same tune. A place in this world. I told them I was attacked. It wasn't an unlikely story, given my identity and location. People had done worse for less. I think it got on the news. But I made it home eventually. I got my insurance money. I got to play with my dogs and kiss my girlfriend. All those things that I thought for a moment I'd lose forever. But I did make it back, and it's still all there. All the wonderful, beautiful things that I built for myself, the little columns that hold up my overpass far away from the insecurities and anxieties of my youth. I'm sure there's still a Julie out there somewhere, but I haven't seen her. I figure she'll make an effort to never be near me again, and that's a relief, I suppose. I guess we don't think too much about the things we leave behind, but in nature, things that are left behind are picked up all the time. Just look at the hermit crabs. I don't know if I'll ever come to terms with having her out there. But if I were to guess, she's still out there whistling her songs and making plans of her own. And maybe, if she's lucky, she can get away with it for a little while longer. And I pray every day that I'll never see her again.